Chapter 2365. Moran makes a move. Boom. After swallowing Yang Hao's soul, the broken ghost Emperor Cauldron actually emitted an even stronger glow. At the same time, the broken ghost gate actually reappeared at this moment, but its glow was much dimmer. After all, the ghost Emperor Cauldron had suffered a Divine Lord's attack from the self-destruction of more than 10 spiritual attachments. Although such an attack wasn't enough to shatter the ghost Emperor Cauldron, it was still severely damaged. It was also this damage that made Yi Fei unable to activate the strongest ghost gate even though he could condense the ghost Emperor Soul Cauldron. What was amazing was that, after the ghost Emperor Cauldron killed Yang Hao and devoured his bloodline and soul, not only did the broken ghost Emperor Soul Cauldron become brighter, even the ghost gate that couldn't be activated was restored. This gave Yi Fei an extremely bold idea. Could it be that besides cultivating the 9 Cauldron Heaven suppressing art, I can also use the Ghost Emperor Cauldron to kill strong enemies and devour their bloodline and soul to quickly repair the Ghost Emperor Cauldron? Yi Fei was faintly excited. When he recalled the Ghost Emperor Cauldron, he was actually stunned for a moment. In a battle between experts, such a daze was where the flaw was. However, due to Yang Hao's sudden death, whether it was the Tao Lords of the Yin Yang Palace or the martial artists of the family Wang, all of them were extremely shocked. At this moment, no one dared to take the opportunity to attack Yi Fei. Instead, they all stared blankly at the place where the Ghost Emperor Cauldron had smashed down, at the terrifying pool of blood. It was Yang Hao's blood. This young master of the Yin Yang Palace, who was good at scheming, didn't use his scheme to kill Yi Fei in the end. Instead, he died under his own scheme. It had to be said that this was a kind of irony. The remaining Tao Lords of the Yin Yang Palace felt like they had been slapped in the face. In Green Province, Yang Ming led 10 Tao Lords to hunt down Yi Fei, who had just broken through to the Lord of Heaven. In the end, they were all wiped out and died in Green Province. In the City of Divine Kings, Yang Hao had led them to kill Yi Fei. In the end, not only had a Divine Lord died in battle, even Yang Hao had been killed by Yi Fei. Furthermore, this time, the Yin Yang Palace's losses were especially disastrous. It was so disastrous that they didn't even know how to return and explain it to the Yin Yang Palace's upper echelons. "Young master, you died so tragically. What are you waiting for? The young master of the Yin Yang Palace has never been killed by an outsider. What's more, the person who killed the young master is a rogue cultivator, a damned trash. Kill him, or else none of us will live." From the ruins of Heavenly Fragrance Hall, a grizzled old man rushed out. This was a half-step Divine Lord that had once followed Yang Hao. Because of Xue Tu's warning, the half-step Divine Lord powerhouses and above didn't dare to attack Yi Fei. Instead, they chose to observe from a distance with their divine sense. Moreover, in order to kill Yi Fei, Du Chong and Yang Hao had joined forces. How could the half-step Divine Lord Old Man have imagined that such an accident would occur? Yang Hao had actually been killed by Yi Fei. As the half-step Divine Lord Old Man rushed over, hatred and anger erupted from his body. The implications of Yang Hao's death were far too great. If he didn't kill Yi Fei, he wouldn't be able to explain himself to the upper echelons of Yin Yang Palace. In his rage, the half-step Divine Lord Old Man finally decided to take the risk. He would rather ignore Xue Tu's warning and kill Yi Fei. Kill. The half-step Divine Lord Old Man crazily rushed forwards. A massive Yin Yang Heaven flipping palm turned the skies black and white as it ruthlessly came crashing down on Yi Fei. Dang. Yi Fei lifted his cauldron to block. But he discovered that the Ghost Emperor Cauldron was unable to block the supernatural powers of the half-step Divine Lord Old Man. Cracks began to appear on its surface once more, and even the newly repaired Ghost Gate began to tremble, its light flickering. Yi Fei's complexion paled. This is bad. The Ghost Emperor Cauldron shattered just now. Even though it has been reformed, its strength has begun to decline. The severely damaged Ghost Emperor Cauldron will find it difficult to block the attacks of a half-step Divine Lord. Understanding this, Yi Fei no longer dared to be careless. Although he hadn't been able to kill Du Chong in this battle, he had still managed to kill Yang Hao. This was enough for him. Yi Fei decisively stopped. As the Ghost Emperor Cauldron floated above his head to resist the descending yin-yang heaven-flipping palm, he released the azure dragon wings and shot into the distance. Bai Yanran Ji Feng, let's go! Hearing this, Bai Shizhong was enraged. Surname Yi, you have no conscience. If it weren't for me blocking these Dao Lords, would you have been able to kill Yang Hao? You didn't even call out to me when you fled. But soon, Bai Shizhong realized that he had wronged Yi Fei. Before Mad Dog and Bai Yanran could react, the dragon turtle had already landed on the ground. As it bit Bai Shizhong, its round body had already rolled into the distance like a wheel. The speed at which it rolled was definitely faster than a wheel. Bai Shizhong was dumbfounded to discover that he and the dragon turtle were the fastest to escape. Yi Fei had just called out to them when the dragon turtle had already rolled out of sight. Even Bai Yanran was stunned. Then, she felt a whistling figure rushing over. Without even looking at Purple Moon on the ground, Yi Fei grabbed Bai Yanran and rushed into the distance. Behind him was the silent Mad Dog. Boom! The half-step Divine Lord Elder's yin-yang heaven-flipping palm finally landed. Yi Fei and the other two narrowly avoided the attack range of the heaven-flipping palm. There was a huge palm print on the ground that had turned the entire sky fragrance into nothingness. The half-step Divine Lord's furious roar reverberated in the sky. You bunch of trash! Why didn't you stop them? Du Chong, you may not have a lower body, but are you scared out of your wits? In the end, the half-step Divine Lord Elder vented his anger on Du Chong. He even exposed Du Chong's greatest secret on the spot. Du Chong was so angry that he shrieked like a demon. Purple Moon even forgot to stop Yi Fei for a moment. She lifted her head in disbelief and looked at Du Chong in the sky. What? Senior brother Du, how could he be a castrate? This can't be true. This can't be true. She thought back to Du Chong's sweet words and promises. In order to make Du Chong love her wholeheartedly, she hadn't hesitated to betray Zhao Yu and cooperate with Du Chong to plot against Yi Fei. She had even fallen out with Bai Yanran and severed all ties with her. In the end, fate had played a huge joke on her. Du Chong was actually not a man. Then, Du Chong's confession of love and sweet words to her, had he only been using her? Du Chong, for you, I gave up everything. But in the end, you lied to me. Purple Moon shed tears of regret, but she couldn't take back everything she had lost. Chong, it looks like after experiencing the impact of the core world, not only has your body been crippled, but your heart has also been crippled. Your master is really disappointed in you. Suddenly, another faint voice echoed through the void. The one who had appeared was none other than the elder of the Divine King Palace, Li Moran. Chapter 2366. When I become a dragon, I didn't expect that there would be a time when I misjudged something. This cauldron is indeed extraordinary. It's worthy of being a treasure left behind by the Emperor of the Ancients. Li Moran did not hide his greed for the Ghost Emperor Cauldron. After all, when Yi Fei obtained the Ghost Emperor Cauldron and returned to Lord Pan's palace, Li Moran had attempted to snatch it from Lord Pan's palace. However, due to Xue Tu's obstruction and Lord Pan's hidden strength, Li Moran was unable to successfully snatch the Ghost Emperor Cauldron from Lord Pan. That said, he had used a little trick, and that was to forcibly leave a crack on the Ghost Emperor Cauldron. Since Li Moran couldn't get it, then no one else could. However, what Li Moran did not expect was that the Ghost Emperor Cauldron, which he thought had been destroyed, was actually so extraordinary. Not only did it repair the cracks on his body, but it was also able to reform itself after being shattered. Li Moran was shocked. Even the Renzu weapons stored in the palace of the King of Gods could not be restored after being destroyed. This also ignited Lemoran's ambition and greed once again. He immediately changed his original intentions, going from watching with interest to personally rushing over from the Divine King's palace and blocking Yi Fei's path. Yi Fei's expression immediately darkened. Du Chang's heart, however, was filled with ecstasy. He cried out sharply, "Master, kill him! Kill him, and my state of mind will recover. I will definitely become the same as before and satisfy you." "Chong'er, you're too naive. It's hard for a person to make progress, but it's easy for him to fall. Yi Fei, you are not bad. To be able to leave Azure Prefecture and come to the city of divine monarchs as an itinerant cultivator proves your perseverance. Despite being surrounded by enemies, you managed to kill Yang Hao, proving your talent. It's a pity that someone like you is wandering outside. Are you willing to join the palace of the Divine King and take me as your master?" Lemoran looked at Yi Fei with a trace of admiration in his eyes. However, Yi Fei could clearly sense that Lemoran and many others were actually looking at the Ghost Emperor cauldron. This person's goal was too obvious. Yi Fei immediately shook his head and mocked. "Lemoran, you are too hypocritical. If you want to steal my Ghost Emperor cauldron, just say it. What do you mean by accepting me as your disciple? You just don't want to be cursed for stealing a junior's treasure, and you also want to shut the mouths of Senior Xue Tu and Pan Wang. If I take you as my master, not only will I not be able to keep this cauldron, I'm afraid I won't be able to keep my life." Boom! Yi Fei's words were like a clap of thunder, causing all the warriors present to reveal expressions of fear and shock. Not only had Yi Fei rejected a divine lord, but he had also exposed Lemoran's hidden hypocrisy. Could it be that this kid has gone mad? The cultivators of the Wang family all sucked in a breath of cold air. Lemoran's hypocrisy had long been rumored in the city of divine kings. However, knowing was one thing, no one dared to say it out loud. This was because Lemoran was a divine lord. This Yemo is really digging his own grave this time. It seems like we don't have to do anything. Lemoran can crush this demon into pieces. The half-step divine Lord Elder of the Yin-Yang Palace sneered and took the lead to retreat into the distance. He also expressed to Lemoran that the Yin-Yang Palace had no intention of fighting for the Ghost Emperor cauldron. Du Chang's expression was ugly, and Ziyu's expression was even more complicated. The only ones who looked normal were Yi Fei and Lemoran. Yi Fei was very calm, and Lemoran was even more so. He was not angry at all in the face of sarcasm. Lemoran said with a smile, "Yi Fei, you are indeed a smart person. Unfortunately, you do not know how to adapt to circumstances, nor do you know how to appreciate favors. Do you still remember the story of the fish and the dragon that I told you before?" Yi Fei did not answer. Lemoran spoke with confidence and composure. "No matter how strong the fish in the ditch is, no matter how hard it works, it can never change the fact that it is a small fish. Perhaps it can rely on its hard work to enter a pond, enter a river, and become a tyrant. However, once it enters the sea, it will never be able to escape the fate of being drowned by the sea. This story tells us that a small fish will always be a small fish, even if it enters the sea, even if it thinks that it has made a comeback." Boom! A fiery light suddenly appeared in the sky. It was Lemoran. The figure that condensed the flaming divine saber had a smile on his face. As he told the story, the gigantic flaming divine saber was like a divine king descending, cleaving apart the heavens and earth. At this moment, it was as if the entire sky above the city of divine kings had been destroyed by the flaming divine saber, and it was slowly cleaving down on the city of divine kings. What? Just by sensing the aura of the divine saber, many cultivators of family Wang felt their blood boil as they frantically retreated into the distance. Yi Fei's expression was extremely serious. He suddenly exerted force and pushed Bai Yanran towards Mad Dog. "Big brother Jifeng, take Bai Yanran away. I'll bring up the rear." "I'm not Jifeng. I'm Mad Dog. In my world, There is only madness and battle. Mad Dog did not leave. Instead, he narrowed his eyes and a frenzied mystique will emerged from his body to resist the aura of the flaming divine saber. Bai Yanran also shouted at this moment. She condensed the innate divine pattern cauldron and blocked the divine saber with Yi Fei's Ghost Emperor cauldron. I can't leave. Pan Wang once said that if a friend is in trouble and does not save him, it is dishonorable. Although I am a woman, I know where loyalty lies. I will die without regret. Bai Yanran's gaze was resolute. In the core world, Yi Fei did not hesitate to jump into the fire eye to save her. Now that Yi Fei was in trouble, how could she leave alone? Not only her, but even further away, the dragon turtle, who had disappeared after rolling away, suddenly roared and rushed over. It even spat Bai Shizhong, who was still in its mouth, towards them. Bai Shizhong cursed the dragon turtle for being a good-for-nothing. It could have escaped, but it threw him back to die. However, the moment it threw him over, Bai Shizhong had already unleashed all his cultivation and punched towards the sky. Then Bai Yanran, Mad Dog, the dragon turtle, and even Xiao Chao, who was hiding in the beast mark space, secretly attacked. They waved a five-colored spiritual wind towards the sky. Seeing everyone so united, Yi Fei could not help but feel a surge of warmth in his heart. Then, a strong fighting spirit emerged from Yi Fei's body like a raging fire and a raging wave. So what if you are a divine lord? Li Moran, just you wait. The day I turn into a dragon will be the day you die. Ghost Emperor Cauldron, kill him! Boom! Following Yi Fei's angry roar, the entire Ghost Emperor Cauldron suddenly shone brightly. Then Yi Fei's body stepped onto the Soul Cauldron and entered the Ghost Gate. In his hand, the black iron heavy sword shone with a dazzling sword light. Behind him, the two Taiji sword cauldrons whistled with a dazzling light. Roar! The dragon turtle in the distance suddenly became as heavy as a mountain and charged towards them. Under the fiery light that filled the sky, the dragon turtle's black tortoise dragon shell shone brightly. Its huge black mouth was like a volcano, spewing out endless demonic flames that blasted towards the sky. However, the dragon turtle's demonic flames did not have any effect. After all, the dragon turtle's realm was still too low. Bai Shizhong's fist radiance and Bai Yanran's connate god cauldron were also unable to block the flaming divine saber. However, Mad Dog, who was in a frenzy, had a layer of strange silver light appear on his body, temporarily blocking a portion of the flaming divine saber's power. Chapter 2367. Big Dipper Bloody Hand. Wherever the divine saber went, the one in charge would be swept away. Although the Ghost Emperor Cauldron was the ancient Emperor's soul cauldron, it was a pity that it was too broken and Yi Fei's cultivation level was too low. There was a gap of 2 levels between the Lord of Heaven and a Divine Lord, which was enough to crush any genius. Yi Fei saw the Ghost Emperor Cauldron let out a cry. It was shattered by Li Moran again. Boom! The divine saber continued to descend. In the sky there were flames everywhere. Li Moran stood in the sky that had turned into flames. He was like a ruthless deity who had sent down a calamity of fire to kill Yi Fei. Only by killing Yi Fei could he truly obtain the Ghost Emperor Cauldron. Yi Fei's heart suddenly tightened. This was the second time he had felt such a cold killing intent from Li Moran. This killing intent was enough to make any Lord of Heaven tremble in fear. But in Yi Fei's heart, besides fear, there was more anger. Endless anger and endless fighting spirit. I can die, but I definitely can't die in the hands of a hypocrite like him. Even if I die, I will fight to the end. Golden body of despair, burn for me. Without the Ghost Emperor Cauldron, he still had the golden body of despair. Without the golden body, he still had the Taiji sword cauldron. Without the sword cauldron, he still had the sword of slaughter and the sword of desolation. Even if all these divine powers weren't enough to ward off the deadly fiery divine saber in midair, he still had the will of the bloody battle, Bai Shizhong, Bai Yanran, and the Mad Dog, his friends who had fought side by side with him, as well as Xiao Chao and the dragon turtle, who had gone through thick and thin with him. I want to fight! Yi Fei let out a godlike roar. Facing the flaming divine blade that was almost certain to kill him, he would not retreat. He raised the black iron heavy sword, and all the energy in his body erupted like a volcano. Yi Fei, you've really gone mad. Bai Shizhong's expression changed greatly. His face was filled with depression and anger. Originally, I could have escaped. It's all that black tortoise's fault. Not only did it come back to die, it even dragged me to die with it. Despite his words, intense divine rune will and bloodline divine flame emerged from Bai Yanran's body. The innate divine rune cauldron in his hand condensed again, releasing even more innate divine light that blasted forward. Under the stimulation of death, Mad Dog suddenly went crazy. His red eyes suddenly turned into a special silver color. For some unknown reason, a silver pillar of light burst out from his body. This pillar of light actually blocked the flaming divine blade for a short period of time. Do it. Life or death, it all depends on this one move. Of course, Yi Fei would not let such a good opportunity slip by. He used all his mystiques and took the lead to attack the Divine Lord's blade. Bai Yanran and Bai Shizhong followed closely behind, coordinating with Yi Fei's attack. However, the moment the divine blade clashed with the mystiques, the entire ground sank by dozens of meters, turning into a huge basin. In the basin, Yi Fei's golden body shattered. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. Suddenly, it was as if a heavy mountain had fallen on top of him. Half of his body sank into the ground. Barf! Not far away, Bai Shizhong also spat out blood. He was pressed to the ground by the impact of the divine blade. Bai Yanran's innate divine rune cauldron was completely shattered. His face was pale as he flew backward. The dragon tortoise hurried over. Its huge body became even bigger as it stood in front of everyone. However, the dragon tortoise's realm was too low. Even the aftermath of the divine blade's shattering made the dragon tortoise groan. Its black tortoise dragon armor shattered with a loud bang. Its entire body was flipped over by the airflow and fell to the ground. However, with its round body, the dragon tortoise did not suffer any serious injuries. The moment it flipped over, it pressed Mad Dog and Bai Shizhong to the ground at the same time, immobilizing them. The two of them spat out blood and were extremely depressed. The warriors of family Wang and the Taoist lords of Yin Yang Palace, who were watching the battle, widened their eyes in shock. What did they see? These few juniors and a fat dragon tortoise had actually shattered the Divine Lord's sure-kill attack. The two of them subconsciously raised their heads and looked at the sky. They saw Limeran's calm expression in the sky. At this moment, he revealed a bright smile. Seeing this smile, Du Chong felt a chill run down his spine. As Limeran's disciple, he naturally knew that the brighter Limeran's smile was, the more it showed the anger in his heart. You guys are very good. Unfortunately, all of you are still too young and don't know what's good for you. Limeran smiled and stretched out his hand. All the divine flames in the sky were suddenly gathered by him, forming an even bigger and stronger divine saber of heaven and earth. It fell coldly again. This time, he would not give these people any chance to breathe. It's over. We're dead for sure this time. Bai Shizhong's face was filled with despair. Mad Dog was also awakened from his madness by the aura of the divine saber of heaven and earth. Bai Yanran smiled bitterly. The dragon tortoise also opened its mouth nervously and continued to spit out large mouthfuls of demonic flames. Yi Fei shook his head gloomily. It's useless. The gap between our realms is too big. If we stay, we'll just be waiting for death. Blackie, take them and leave quickly. Bam! Yi Fei kicked the ground in front of him fiercely, causing the ground to crack and a huge gully to appear. Then, he was going to reassemble the soul-condensing cauldron and fight Limeran head-on. This would also buy time for Bai Yanran and the others to escape. Yi Fei even thought of letting the dragon tortoise take Xiao Chao away. However, Xiao Chao did not leave. Instead, he imitated the heavenly Tao Tree Lord and waved his hand like an old man. Xiao Chao was not afraid. This was because when Li Moran attacked again, an iron-masked man walked out silently from the void. He wore a scarlet cape and grabbed the terrifying divine saber of heaven and earth with one hand. Then, he crushed it with his bare hand. That's the Big Dipper blood hand. He is indeed Xue Tu, the former number 1 on the Earth Carnage roll. A Tao Lord of the Yin Yang Palace exclaimed in fear. This news also shocked Yi Fei and the others. This arena master of the arena of life and death was actually the former number 1 expert on the Earth Carnage roll? Seeing Xue Tu appear, Li Moran's smiling expression turned serious. Xue Tu, old friend, what is the meaning of this? Are you going to attack me? Li Moran, you are still so hypocritical. Back then, I treated you as my best brother. Whatever you wanted, I would give it to you. Even though it was clearly her who fell in love with me first, for the sake of our brotherhood, I still rejected her and gave the opportunity to you. But how did you treat me? For a mere divine Lord Abijna, you actually plotted against me in the core world while I was heavily injured. You made me fake my death and even peeled off my face to disguise as me. You tried to get close to her and violate her. Unfortunately, man proposes but God disposes. She still saw through your hypocrisy. In the end, you gave her to your scoundrel friends and humiliated her to death. Li Moran, Xue Tu will never forget a brother like you for the rest of his life. Back then, your scoundrel friends all died in my hands. Now it's your turn. Xue Tu walked towards Li Moran step by step. His eyes under the iron mask emitted endless hostility and killing intent. Chapter 2368. See you in Jianghu. Perhaps, from the very beginning, Xue Tu had been plotting to create a reason to kill Li Moran. And now, Xue Tu had undoubtedly found it. Li Moran had disobeyed Xue Tu's orders and attacked the younger generation. Xue Tu had a good reason to kill Li Moran without worrying about being attacked by the experts from the palace of the King of Gods. Thinking of this, Yi Fei suddenly looked at Mad Dog. Mad Dog lowered his head guiltily. Yi Fei, Master asked me to apologize on his behalf. In order to deal with Li Moran, he used you, but Field Master was forced to do so. The Deathmatch Palace and the Palace of the King of Gods are allies. Unless Li Moran provoked Master, the Deathmatch Palace would not have allowed Master to attack, no matter how deep the hatred between the two sides was. In that case, Senior Xue Tu is not helping me because of Yanbing? Yi Fei sneered and looked up at the two Sir Gods in the sky. This time, Xue Tu did not hold back. He fought with his life on the line, which made Li Moran furious. Mad Dog's expression was gloomy. Killing Li Moran is Master's only wish. Master said that he felt guilty for using you. In the future, I will entrust my life to you. Yi Fei finally understood why Xue Tu asked Mad Dog to follow him. It had to be said that the older the ginger, the spicier it was. Whether it was Xue Tu, Li Moran, or Pan Wang, they were all true veterans. Compared to them, I'm still too inexperienced. Yi Fei smiled bitterly. He wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and reformed his soul cauldron. At this time, the battle between Xue Tu and Li Moran had moved from the sky to the clouds. This battle between Sir Gods had shocked the entire city of the King of Gods. But more divine senses were greedily scanning Yi Fei. Especially when they saw that the Ghost Emperor Cauldron could still be reformed after being shattered by a Sir God, but it was even more broken. A cold light suddenly burst out from these divine senses. Such a precious cauldron does not deserve to fall into the hands of a nameless individual. It should belong to us Sir Gods. Boom! Silently, another Sir God attacked. In the sky, Li Moran and Xue Tu roared at the same time. Yi Fei, take Mad Dog and leave quickly. Leave the city of the King of Gods as soon as possible. Shui-Tu owes you and he can only repay you in his next life. Shui-Tu actually had the will to die? Yi Fei's expression changed. Originally, he should be angry that Shui-Tu had used him. But looking at the crazy Shui-Tu in the sky, who was trading injuries and life for life with Li Moran, Yi Fei suddenly found himself unable to be angry. After all, although Shui-Tu had used him, Shui-Tu had helped him more. Let's go. Sensing the unscrupulous divine senses in the vicinity that were staring at the Ghost Emperor Cauldron, Yi Fei knew that he had to leave the city of the King of Gods. Otherwise, the Ghost Emperor Cauldron would kill him here. It's a pity that I didn't get to see Zhao Yu before I leave. Yi Fei shook his head. Suddenly, he looked up at Ziyu, who was not far away. Ziyu, if you don't want Zhao Yu to target you, help me pass a message. Tell her to wait for me. One day, I will personally come to the King of God's palace and take her back. Big Black, let's go. Boom. Hearing Yi Fei's words, the dragon turtle that was playing dead on the ground immediately flipped over and picked up the heavily injured Bai Yanran, Bai Shizhong, and Mad Dog on its back. Then, it flapped its azure dragon wings and flew into the distance. That black pig, where do you think you're going? Stop him, kill Yimo, and take back the Ghost Emperor Cauldron. The half-step Sir God of the Yin-Yang Palace flew into a rage and led his men to attack again. Above the clouds, the battle between Li Moran and Shui-Tu had reached its climax. Both sides were fighting fiercely and no one was paying attention to the situation on the ground. The other forces that had already noticed the Ghost Emperor Cauldron were ready to make a move. The dragon turtle had just flown less than 1,000 meters away. Suddenly, a terrifying saber radiance appeared in the void. It split the sky in half and slashed at Yi Fei. Where do you think you're going? Leave the cauldron behind and the Tyrant Saber School will spare your life. The Tyrant Saber School is just a small sect. If the cauldron falls into the hands of the King of God's palace, anyone who dares to touch it will be an enemy of the King of God's palace. Ha ha ha, is the King of God's palace that great? The cauldron belongs to the capable. Those who are not can get lost. A masked divine lord suddenly appeared outside the Heavenly Fragrance Inn. He shattered the saber radiance of the Tyrant Saber School's divine lord and blocked the new divine lord from the King of God's palace. The half-step divine lords of the Yin-Yang Palace, the hidden half-step divine lords of the family Wang, the Dao lords of the Li family, and even many independent cultivators, such as the Lord of Heaven, appeared out of nowhere and attacked Yi Fei. Bai Shizhong's expression changed instantly. We're really done for. Yi, you're too good at causing trouble. How can I leave my sister in your care? Get lost. Yi Fei was already in a bad mood after being forced to leave the City of Gods. He simply kicked Bai Shizhong off the dragon turtle. After all, these people were here for the Ghost Emperor Cauldron. As long as Bai Shizhong did not stop them, they would not attack Bai Shizhong. At this thought, Yi Fei wanted to kick Mad Dog and Bai Yanran off the dragon turtle as well so that he could attract all the firepower. Mad Dog's expression changed and he said angrily, "Master asked me to follow you. If you chase me away, I'll go down right now and return this life to you." Bai Yanran was also angry. He took out a dagger and put it to his neck. "Try chasing me away, you're ruthless." Yi Fei was extremely depressed. He could only let Bai Yanran and Mad Dog continue to sit on the dragon turtle's back. Only Bai Shizhong, who was kicked off the dragon turtle, flew into a rage and cursed, "Yi, you're not human. It's fine if you run for your life, but how dare you kidnap my sister?" Boom. Bai Shizhong's voice was instantly drowned out by the terrifying explosions of divine powers. Two more masked divine lords rushed over from afar and attacked Yi Fei. Bai Shizhong's face turned pale. Yi Fei was also anxious. He was already considering whether he should bear the pain of abandoning the Ghost Emperor Cauldron and run for his life. At this moment, a calm voice sounded in his and Bai Yanran's ears. "Go east and you'll be able to leave the city. The ruins of the heavenly palace of despair are there. It was Pan Wang's voice. Just like the other divine lords present, Pan Wang was still covered in a black cloth. Beside him was an old man dressed in black. The two of them charged towards the divine lords together. On the ground, there was suddenly a rumbling sound of running. They were all masked in black cloth, but Mad Dog recognized many familiar figures at a glance. It's Black Widow Butcher. They're the reinforcements from the arena of death. Kill. No one responded to Mad Dog. The team that appeared directly charged towards the Yin Yang Palace and the warriors from Family Wang, causing the battlefield to become even more chaotic. Seeing so many people covering his escape, Yi Fei suddenly felt that his trip to the city of divine monarchs was not in vain. At least he had made so many friends, so many brothers who had gone through thick and thin with him. Senior Xuetu, don't worry. I'll definitely take good care of Mad Dog. Senior Pan Wang, I'll definitely go to the ruins of the Heavenly Palace of Despair. One day, I'll make the Heavenly Palace of Despair appear in the world openly. Zhao Yu, wait for me. Chapter 2369. Just to wait for him. Inside the City of Divine Kings, the battle was in full swing. Outside the City of Divine Kings, Yi Fei was at a loss. His main purpose in heading to the Divine Prefecture was to find Zhao Yu. Unfortunately, Zhao Yu was within reach, but he had to leave the City of Divine Kings because of the Ghost Emperor Cauldron. In this vast world, where can I find shelter? Yi Fei sighed in his heart. The owner asked me to follow you. Wherever you go, I will go. Mad Dog said lightly. He did not care where he went. Yi Fei nodded, then shook his head. He understood that asking for Mad Dog's opinion was purely a waste of time. Finally, he looked at Bai Yanran. Bai Yanran said, "Didn't the Grand Elder say that we should head east? It is said that there are ruins of the Heavenly Palace of Despair there. Perhaps we can find treasures there and improve our strength." That may be the case, but do you know the exact location of the ruins? Yi Fei retorted gloomily. This Pan Wang was really something. He never spoke clearly. At this moment, the silent Mad Dog suddenly thought of something. With a strange expression, he said, "What relic? I don't know. But I heard from the Master that the east side of the City of Divine Kings seems to be the territory of the Sword Palace." What? Sword Palace? Yi Fei's blank eyes suddenly lit up. He hadn't forgotten what the Nine Heavens Sword Master had told him. However, when he came to the Divine Land, he was so focused on looking for Zhao Yu that he forgot about the Sword Palace. Now that he had left the City of Divine Kings, why not go to the Sword Palace and try his luck? Perhaps he could even use the power of the Sword Palace to return to the City of God Kings faster and bring back Zhao Yu. Thinking of this, Yi Fei was no longer confused. Instead, he was instantly filled with fighting spirit. He said in a deep voice, "All right, let's go to the Sword Palace. Big Black, let's go. Xiao Chao, pay attention and scout ahead." When Yi Fei stepped onto the dragon turtle, he did not forget to ask Xiao Chao to keep an eye out for anyone following him. After all, the Ghost Emperor Cauldron in his hands was too dangerous. Even if he left the City of Divine Kings, it was hard to guarantee that no one would attack him on the way. Therefore, Yi Fei did not dare to be careless while they were on the road. The battle in the City of Divine Kings gradually came to an end, not long after Yi Fei left. The Sir Gods who had attacked all went into hiding. Only the bloody battle between Xuetu and Li Moran lasted for 10 days and 10 nights. 10 days later, the palace of the King of Gods finally could not accept the death of their divine emperor. They took action and rescued Li Moran. Xuetu, on the other hand, was severely injured and unconscious after being besieged by several Sir Gods from the Palace of Deities. In this battle, Weaver King, who had never revealed his abilities, had also displayed a shocking and terrifying combat strength. Weaver King had blocked 5 Sir Gods alone and had even forcefully rescued Xuetu's Day. This had shocked the human ancestor in the palace of the divine king. Another thing that shocked the palace of the King of Gods was that Zhao Yu had finally broken through to become a Tao Lord after several months of seclusion. However, due to the Ghost Emperor Cauldron, most of the upper echelons of the palace of the King of Gods had gathered together to discuss and did not have the time to congratulate him. However, there was one person who had been waiting anxiously for Zhao Yu even before he came out of seclusion. This person was none other than Ziyu. After Yang Hao's death in battle, the matter of Du Chong and Yang Hao using Zhao Yu's name to assassinate Yi Fei was also exposed. Although this matter was suppressed by Ziyu's elder father, Ziyu knew that if she could not obtain Zhao Yu's forgiveness, she would be in trouble in the palace of the King of Gods. Coupled with Du Chong's deceit, Ziyu finally made the right decision in her regret. Hence, when Zhao Yu came out of seclusion, she saw Ziyu kneeling before her. "Uncle Master, I have done something wrong. I was deceived by Du Chong and stole your note. I also used your name to invite Yi Fei to meet me at the Heavenly Fragrance House." Ziyu told her everything honestly. She did not dare to hide anything from Zhao Yu. Zhao Yu listened quietly with a calm expression. However, her heart was in turmoil. Yi Fei had actually come to the city of the King of Gods. She subconsciously thought that Yi Fei had come to look for her. However, because the palace of the King of Gods was too strict and wanted her to become a Tao Lord as soon as possible, she had missed the best opportunity to meet Yi Fei. Du Chong and Yang Hao had even joined forces and used her name to plot against Yi Fei. He must have been very disappointed at that time. For me, he did not hesitate to kill his way from the Earth Realm to the Celestial Realm and then from Qingzhou to the city of the King of Gods. In the end, I did not do anything for him. I even almost killed him. Zhao Yu's eyes were suddenly filled with tears. Ziyu looked at Zhao Yu in shock. In her impression, Zhao Yu was noble and cold. She was like a goddess from the 9 heavens who was otherworldly. But now, Zhao Yu was crying for a man. She was crying for Yi Fei. Ziyu was shocked. She could not believe it. Could it be that Uncle Master Zhao Yu and Yi Fei are lovers? How is that possible? The difference between the two of them is like heaven and earth. But if that was not the case, how could Zhao Yu, who had always been cold, cry for a man? Ziyu suddenly became nervous. She thought of the words Yi Fei had asked her to pass on before he left. Originally, Ziyu did not want to pass on Yi Fei's message. However, Zhao Yu's attitude made Ziyu say, "Uncle Master Zhao, Yi Fei asked me to pass on his message before he left." "What message?" Zhao Yu sounded a little nervous. Ziyu had a strange look on her face as she said, "He asked you to wait for him. One day, he will come to the God King's palace to take you back." Upon hearing this, Zhao Yu's heart could not help but tremble. At the same time, she felt a warm current pass through her. The tears in her eyes turned into a faint smile. This guy is still as arrogant as before. Does he think it's that easy to enter the God King's palace? And that Du Chong, Zhao Yu's face, suddenly turned cold. She suddenly rushed towards the largest palace in the God King's palace. That was where the upper echelons of the God King's palace discussed matters. Only divine lords could enter. Only 2 disciples of the God King's palace could enter. One was Zhao Yu and the other was Du Chong. At this moment, Du Chong was standing inside with a cold expression. He was being questioned by the upper echelons of the God King's palace. They were mainly asking about Yi Fei and the Ghost Emperor Cauldron. There were even divine lords who said that they would send people to hunt down Yi Fei and take back the Ghost Emperor Cauldron. At this moment, Zhao Yu walked in and immediately attracted everyone's attention. Du Chong also looked at Zhao Yu subconsciously. He habitually revealed a handsome smile and nodded slightly. Zhao Yu did not even look at Du Chong. She just walked forward and looked at the Divine Lord Elders and the several Renzu seated high above. "Greetings, patriarchs. Zhao Yu, I have a request." What is it?" Among the Renzu, a female Renzu in a red robe looked at Zhao Yu dotingly. She was Zhao Yu's master, Qiyun Renzu. Master, I would like to ask you to retract your orders and not hunt down Yi Fei. I even hope that you can allow me to leave the palace and look for Yi Fei. Zhao Yu mustered up her courage and faced Qiyun Renzu. Her words shocked Renzu. One of the Renzu slammed the table and said, Zhao Yu, what nonsense are you talking about? Do you know that Yi Fei is a demon? Not only did he kill Yang Hao, he even took away the Ghost Emperor cauldron that should have belonged to the God King's palace. Chapter 2370. The trip to the Sword Palace. Do you know what you are saying? Given your status and position, your future husband should be a true prodigy like Fengyun or one of the princes of the Crimson Moon Holy Dynasty. Only he is worthy of you. No matter what happened between you and Yi Fei in the past, from the moment you stepped into the palace of the deity, you were like the stars in the sky while he was just a clay ball on the ground. Qiyun Renzu was furious. She had never expected that her most valued disciple would fall in love with a lone cultivator. The palace of the deity would never accept such a thing. Qiyun Renzu wasn't the only one who was furious. The other Renzu were also furious. Yi Fei, who is he? He is just a lone cultivator. He thinks that he has some luck and dares to have improper thoughts about Zhao Yu. It seems like seizing the Ghost Emperor cauldron is too easy a punishment. He cannot be allowed to live. Du Chang's eyes flashed with jealousy and indignation when he heard Zhao Yu defend Yi Fei. He couldn't help but mock, Zhao Yu, you should give up on Yi Fei. The difference between the two of you is like heaven and earth. Oh yes, I heard that when he escaped, he kidnapped Bai Shizhong's sister and Bai Shizhong was suddenly unable to continue, because an aura of death had suddenly locked onto him. The dual wills of ice and fire appeared on Zhao Yu's body at the same time. His voice was icy as he said, Du Chong, this is the last time I'm warning you. In the future, if you dare to do anything to Yi Fei, or say anything bad about Yi Fei, then don't blame me for not caring about our relationship as fellow disciples. Master Renzu, I will say the same thing. If you kill Yi Fei, you will be killing me. If Yi Fei dies, I will not live either. With that, Zhao Yu turned around and left. His eyes were filled with tears. Qiyun Renzu was so angry that her entire body was trembling. She raised her hand and was about to hit Zhao Yu. However, she had put too much effort into Zhao Yu. Sometimes, she even treated Zhao Yu like her own daughter. How could she bear to hurt Zhao Yu? It's all Yi Fei's fault. If it weren't for him, you would not have said such things. Qiyun Renzu couldn't let Zhao Yu down, so she could only vent her anger on Yi Fei. The other human ancestors of the deity monarch palaces were enraged and cursed together. This kid is indeed a devil. Leaving him alive will definitely be a disaster. But if we attack Yi Fei, what if we force Zhao Yu to rebel? A Renzu cautiously reminded them. The Renzu, who had been furious just now, immediately fell silent. Du Chang's face turned pale and he clenched his fists tightly. If the Renzu of the deity palace were willing to step in, Yi Fei would not be able to escape even if he had wings. However, Zhao Yu's words obviously made the Renzu give up on pursuing Yi Fei. Du Chong was so angry that his eyes turned green. Yi Fei didn't know that because of Zhao Yu's attitude, he was lucky enough to escape the pursuit of the Renzu of the deity palace. At this moment, he was in a restaurant, eavesdropping on the discussions of the people around him. The battle at the city of the deity palace had spread far and wide. Not only had it spread to the countries near the city of the deity palace, but it had also spread to a small part of the countries under the influence of the Sword Palace. Unlike Qingzhou, there were a number of small countries near every major city in the Divine Prefecture. These small countries were the subsidiary forces of the major cities. The country that Yi Fei had entered was a small country between the city of 10,000 swords and the city of the deity palace. There were no Renzu in this country, and the strongest was a Renzu. For now, Yi Fei was still safe. However, Yi Fei knew that the implications of the Ghost Emperor Cauldron were too great. Even if Pan King and Shui Tu could suppress ordinary divine monarchs in the City of Divine Kings, they couldn't suppress the overlord of the City of Divine Kings, the Palace of Divine Kings. Once the Palace of Divine Kings was determined to hunt them down, even sending divine monarchs like the human ancestor, it would be a very dangerous matter. Therefore, the first thing that Yi Fei did after entering this small country was to disguise himself. He and Mad Dog became independent cultivators and traveled around. Bai Yanran became a young lady of a large family and traveled alone. This way they wouldn't attract any attention. At the same time, not long ago, the three of them joined a caravan. This caravan was considered the imperial merchant of this small country and was responsible for paying tribute to the City of 10,000 Swords every year. This also made many warriors who wanted to go to the City of 10,000 Swords choose to join this caravan. Today was also the day that the caravan gathered. The restaurant was packed with people. Suddenly, someone shouted excitedly, "It's here! The airship to the City of 10,000 Swords is here." Yi Fei was also a little excited. One must know that the Heaven Realm was very vast. Even a small country was incomparably vast. Warriors below the heavenly venerate level might spend 10 years and still not be able to leave the country. Even a Renzu would need to spend several months. Moreover, there were at least a dozen large and small countries in the way to the City of 10,000 Swords, so the time spent would be even longer. Therefore, there were only two ways to go to the Sword Palace. One was to take the expensive teleportation formation, and the other was to follow the caravan to the City of 10,000 Swords and take the airship. Considering that the teleportation formation was near, there must be forces who wanted to seize the Ghost Emperor Cauldron. Yi Fei finally decided to take the airship. However, he did not go up immediately. Instead, he carefully observed for a while. After confirming that no one was following him, he nodded to Mad Dog and Bai Yanran, who were not far away. The three of them would enter the airship from different directions without attracting attention. However, Yi Fei did not expect that while he was observing the crowd, he saw Yi Fei order a table full of dishes in the beast mark space. He ate a little and stopped. The dragon turtle's heart ached. Suddenly, its black mouth shot out like lightning. Its tongue curled and swept up the table full of dishes, including the plates. Yi Fei's face darkened. He clearly saw a pair of eyes staring at him. It was a little girl. Her eyes were shining as she stared at him, as if she had discovered something new. Yi Fei had the urge to drag the dragon turtle out and beat it up. They had hidden themselves very well, but the dragon turtle had almost ruined their plan. Fortunately, it was only a little girl who saw this scene, and an ordinary little girl with no cultivation. Yi Fei did not mind. He only nodded slightly to Mad Dog and Bai Yanran. The three of them entered the airship together. However, they did not gather together. Instead, they chose different spots and sat down cross-legged to cultivate. However, what left Yi Fei speechless was that not long after he sat down, the little girl flew up under the protection of an old couple. The little girl was clearly surprised to see Yi Fei. The old couple stared at Yi Fei sternly. They even vaguely emitted the aura of a Dao Lord, as if warning him. The surrounding cultivators consciously opened up a large empty space for the three of them to cultivate. Yi Fei acted as if nothing had happened. He moved to the side and chose the furthest corner. He closed his eyes and rested, continuing to comprehend the golden body of despair of the Dao Lord realm. Moreover, after the battle in the City of Divine Kings, Yi Fei seemed to have vaguely seen a strange mountain. Chapter 2371. Demon Mountain Insight. This was because a martial artist's Dao Mountain changed according to the martial artist's talent. The stronger a martial artist was, the stronger their Dao Mountain would be. It would become increasingly difficult to cross the Dao Mountain that blocked one's path and turn it into a staircase to reach the peak of martial arts. Although Yi Fei was only at the late stage of the Heavenly Lord realm, and was actually a half-step Tao Lord at the peak of the Heavenly Lord realm, there was still some distance between him and the peak of the Heavenly Lord realm. However, his combat strength had long since reached the level of an ordinary Tao Lord. This actually allowed him to observe his own Tao mountain in advance. It was a towering and majestic mountain peak that stretched as far as the eye could see. Just looking at the Tao mountain made Yi Fei feel depressed. Clearly, his Tao mountain wasn't that easy to cross. After all, just breaking through to the golden body of despair required 1,000,000 Xian veins. That was a huge amount of cultivation resources. It seems like it's almost impossible to break through to the Tao Lord realm in a short period of time. Right now, I can only try my best to comprehend more of the golden body of despair to lay a better foundation for breaking through to the Tao Lord realm. At this thought, Yi Fei looked at Bai Yanran. Along the way, he had taken the time to impart the golden body of despair to her. At this moment, Bai Yanran wasn't far away, cultivating with her eyes closed. However, the way a beauty cultivated was still very attractive. Even though Bai Yanran was wearing a veil, it still couldn't block out the fiery gazes from all around. However, Mad Dog's position just happened to be not far from Bai Yanran's side. Anyone who wanted to get close to Bai Yanran had to pass by Mad Dog. Looking at Mad Dog, who was exuding a crazy aura from time to time, many martial artists looked at Mad Dog with resentment. The heavens are really unfair. It's not easy to get a chance to be on the same boat as a beauty, but there's a crazy Tao Lord on the other side. What a killjoy! I think this person might be a lunatic who cultivates the demonic path. Although beauties are good, it would be too unlucky to provoke a lunatic. Actually, lunatic isn't that bad. There's someone even crazier over there. Ever since he boarded the ship, I haven't seen him open his eyes. He spent all his time cultivating. It's just a matter of traveling. Why is he working so hard? A warrior pursed his lips and noticed Yi Fei. However, Yi Fei did not notice them. Ever since he boarded the ship, Yi Fei had been completely immersed in his cultivation. The reason he was so crazy was not only to comprehend the golden body of despair, but also to repair the Ghost Emperor Cauldron as soon as possible. After all, the Ghost Emperor Cauldron had already been broken twice, and its power had dropped to less than 30%. If he didn't repair it as soon as possible, the next time he met a Divine Lord, even if he met a half-step Divine Lord, he would still die. This was also the reason why Yi Fei chose to take the flying ship to the city of 10,000 swords. He needed time to restore the Ghost Emperor Cauldron's power as much as possible. As Yi Fei was immersed in his cultivation, Xiao Chao felt bored and went back to sleep. Only the dragon turtle was left. It stared at the food provided by the caravan every day and opened its black mouth. Every time this happened, there would be a little girl who would look at Yi Fei and the black mouth that would suddenly appear with a very surprised gaze. She had been observing him for dozens of days. She realized that Yi Fei didn't seem like a bad person. The old couple beside her also seemed to be immersed in some kind of mysterious cultivation. The little girl finally became bolder. Little by little, she quietly approached Yi Fei. She even grabbed a very delicate snack and suddenly threw it at Yi Fei. When the dragon turtle realized that it was just a little girl with no cultivation, it didn't reject her. It habitually opened its black mouth and ate the snack in one bite. The little girl was immediately greatly encouraged. She threw a few more snacks at the dragon turtle. This made the dragon turtle hesitate. However, when it saw that Yi Fei was still cultivating and Xiao Chao was sleeping, the dragon turtle finally accepted them all and ate them in one bite. As time passed, the dragon turtle and the little girl formed some kind of tacit understanding. This made Yi Fei, who happened to discover it, feel very depressed. However, when he thought about the dragon turtle's recent performance, Yi Fei could only pretend that he didn't see it and continue to cultivate crazily. As he cultivated, the cracks on the nearly broken Ghost Emperor cauldron began to gradually reduce. Finally, after flying for about 3 months, the Ghost Emperor cauldron finally returned to its original state when Yi Fei first obtained it. It's a pity that my cultivation level is still too low. I can only repair the current damage of the Ghost Emperor cauldron, but I can't repair its previous damage. Otherwise, if I had a complete Ghost Emperor cauldron, I might have been able to kill Li Moran with one blow. Yi Fei shook his head and suddenly opened his eyes. He was startled when he saw the little girl. She had actually run to the opposite side of him. She was even holding a snack in her hand and feeding it to the dragon turtle. Yi Fei's sudden opening of his eyes gave the little girl a fright. The dragon turtle also felt very guilty. At this moment, the old couple also woke up. When they saw that the little girl wasn't by their side but had run to Yi Fei's side, they were shocked. However, when they saw that Yi Fei was only at the Lord of Heaven realm and that the dragon turtle was a ruler, they heaved a sigh of relief. The old woman immediately took the little girl back and whispered, "Miss, you scared us to death. There are bad people outside. How can you run around?" The old man glared at Yi Fei. "Take care of your turtle. Wu Mountain is ahead. Be careful not to lose your life." After saying that, the old man turned around and left with the little girl. He quickly left the area. Yi Fei was baffled. Was that a threat? What kind of place was the Demon Mountain? He looked up at Bai Yanran in the distance and then at Mad Dog. At this moment, several Dao monarchs of the caravan suddenly appeared on the flying ship. They said in a low voice, "Dear guests, the Demon Mountain is ahead. That is the territory of the demons. If anyone leaves the flying ship and is attacked by the demons, we will not save them." With that, these Dao monarchs rushed to the observation deck of the flying ship as if they were facing a great enemy. The martial artists on the flying ship also became noisy. It's the Demon Mountain. This is the most famous dangerous place near the city of 10,000 swords. It's said that apart from large groups and lone martial artists, very few people dare to pass through the Demon Mountain. These martial artists discussed animatedly. Some of them were even bold enough to fly outside to observe the Demon Mountain. However, these people did not dare to go more than 1 meter away from the flying ship. They were obviously afraid of being attacked by the demons. Yi Fei could not help but be puzzled. He followed the crowd and walked to the side of the ship. Bai Yanran and Mad Dog also walked over. Yi Fei asked, "Isn't this the territory of the Sword Palace? There are demons here. Is there a celestial like the core world? Could the ruins of the heavenly palace of despair be here?" "Impossible. I've heard the name of the Demon Mountain from old ancestor Pan Wang. It's said that this Demon Mountain is very strange. It was once the remnant of a demon who was close to the ancient Emperor realm. This Dao Mountain is filled with demonic nature. As long as a martial artist is injured, their blood essence and lifespan will be constantly drained. In the end, they will die here," Bai Yanran said with a serious expression. Mad Dog also said coldly, "I remember that the sect master also mentioned this Demon Mountain. He once said that it's best not to provoke the demons in this Demon Mountain. There's no need to joke about your blood essence and lifespan just to get rid of a group of demons. Moreover, the demons here are very law-abiding. As long as you pay them a toll, they will not take the initiative to attack." Chapter 2372. A sneak attack in the middle of the night. The demons were indeed very disciplined. When they knew that this was a merchant ship heading to the city of 10,000 swords to pay tribute to the Sword Palace, the demons did not stop them. After collecting a considerable amount of Xian veins, the rolling demon qi around the flying ship suddenly disappeared. The flying ship continued to move forward. Soon, Yi Fei saw the true appearance of the Demon Mountain. It was a huge black mountain range. From afar it looked like a demon dragon entrenched on the ground. However, it was not a real mountain range. It was a Dao mountain left behind by an existence close to the ancient emperor after he fell. When Yi Fei approached the demon Marquis Mountain, he could clearly feel his ghost emperor cauldron trembling slightly. Clearly, the ghost emperor cauldron could also feel the incomparably terrifying pressure from the demon Marquis Mountain. In order to reach the city of 10,000 swords, the demon mountain had become an obstacle that they had to pass through. As long as they could cross the demon mountain, it meant that they were not far from the Sword Palace. The successful negotiation between the merchant group and the demons also raised the spirits of the martial artists on the flying ship. Yi Fei and Bai Yanran looked at each other and both heaved a sigh of relief. It seems that we were right to split up. The forces in the City of Divine Kings should not have caught up with us, Bai Yanran said with a smile. When she realized that there was no danger, she naturally would not pretend not to know Yi Fei. Instead, she stood beside Yi Fei. Mad Dog hesitated for a moment. He did not stand over but took the initiative to move further away. This made many martial artists who wanted to strike up a conversation with Bai Yanran very depressed. They had tried for a few months but could not find a chance to talk to Bai Yanran. In the end, Yi Fei did not do anything. Bai Yanran actually took the initiative to talk to him. They even seemed to be on good terms. The strange thing about the Demon Mountain was not only that it was occupied by demons. When night fell, the entire Demon Mountain would emit a powerful demonic light. Every time the demonic light appeared, the flying boat would stop and activate the defensive formation, floating in the air without moving. The demonic light of the demonic mountain will produce a powerful suction force. Once one is sucked into the demonic light, the flying boat will be in danger of crashing. Considering that there will be too many demonic light tonight, in order to ensure everyone's safety, we will let the flying boat stay on the demonic mountain for one night. The Dowlord of the caravan stepped forward and explained the situation to the others, then returned to the interior of the vessel and continued to stand guard. They were responsible for protecting the treasures which were being escorted to the Sword Palace. As usual, the guests on the airboat were cultivating, sleeping or watching the devil light spurting out of the demon's mountain. They would leave this dangerous zone after daybreak. Yi Fei and Bai Yanran also found an empty space and sat down. They began to exchange their insights on cultivating the golden body of despair. Mad Dog sat cross-legged to the side with a murderous look on his face. This made many warriors who wanted to approach him give up helplessly. The night deepened. Many warriors on the airboat had fallen asleep. After Yi Fei and Bai Yanran finished their exchange, they also sat down and continued to cultivate. At this moment, outside the airboat, in the pitch-black demonic mountain, a pair of cold eyes suddenly appeared. "Are you sure the target is on this airboat?" "I'm sure. It's just that this airboat belongs to the royal family of Chiun and they have paid a toll according to the rules. If news of this gets out, I'm afraid they will lose their source of income." Then let's make sure the news doesn't get out. Pass down the order. Apart from the target this time, kill everyone else. Boom. In the darkness, the demons used some unknown method. Suddenly, an intense demonic light appeared under the airboat which seemed to be in a safe zone. The impact caused the entire airboat to shake violently. Many warriors on the airboat were immediately shaken by the impact. The Dowlord in charge of protecting the airboat also shouted, "Everyone, don't panic. This is just an accidental burst of demonic light. Our airboat will be able to rush out immediately." As he spoke, the entire airboat was already shining brightly. It was about to rush out of the range of the demonic light. The Dowlords looked nervous. This was not the first time they had come to the demonic mountain. In the past, such an accident had never happened where the airboat stopped. Boom! As the airboat moved, suddenly, another demonic light erupted from the demonic mountain like a volcanic eruption. The impact caused the airboat to shake even more. Bai Yanran immediately stopped cultivating. He stood up and said in confusion, "What's going on? Can't the Dowlords of the caravan choose a safer place to camp?" Yi Fei also stood up. He looked at the shaking airboat and shook his head with a serious expression. These demonic lights are strange. It doesn't seem to be a coincidence. It seems to be man-made. Big Brother G-Fong, protect by Yanran well. I'll go out and take a look. Boom! At this moment, the third demonic light attacked the airboat even more fiercely. It even shattered the defensive array of the airboat. Before the people on the airboat could react, the fourth and fifth demonic light erupted from the pitch-black demonic mountain and blasted into the sky. On the airboat, the downlords of the caravan were all shocked. Someone even roared in anger, "Oh no, this is an enemy attack! A demonic person is controlling the demonic mountain and attacking us. If you don't want to die, abandon the airboat immediately." The Lord of Heaven, who had already left the caravan, put the big box into his space belt in advance and jumped down the demonic mountain. Seeing the caravan's actions, more martial artists also left the airboat and jumped down the pitch-black demonic mountain. Yi Fei did not dare to delay. He knew that the airboat had become the target of the demonic person's attack. He could only quickly jump out of the airboat with Bai Yanran and Mad Dog. Bam! The moment they jumped down, the airboat, which had lost its defense, was blasted into pieces by the demonic light. Some of the martial artists, who could not escape the airboat in time, were also shattered. The entire sky was filled with a strong bloody aura that made people want to vomit. However, the bloody aura did not dissipate in the sky. Instead, it was sucked into the demonic mountain and turned into bloody light that surged into the demonic mountain. After absorbing the bloody aura, the demonic mountain became even more terrifying. Yi Fei jumped out of the airboat and subconsciously wanted to open his azure dragon wings. However, he soon discovered in shock that there was a strong void restriction in the demonic mountain. Even downlords could not fly in the demonic mountain. However, the downlords of the caravan were very experienced. Since they could not fly, they immediately released their dark force and condensed a pair of huge dark force wings that glided toward the demonic mountain. This was not a divine ability, but a technique to use dark force. Yi Fei took a look and instantly understood. He hurriedly condensed dark force wings with Bai Yanran and Mad Dog and slowly floated down the demonic mountain. This moment seemed long, but it actually happened in a short moment. The entire airboat had exploded. Then, the martial artists on the airboat fell down the demonic mountain like dumplings. There were also a few unlucky ones who did not grasp the technique of condensing dark force wings in time. Their entire bodies smashed heavily into the demonic mountain like meteorite. Those martial artists with strong defenses were still fine. Even if they fell from a high altitude, they would not be injured. The key was that those martial artists with weak defenses and weak realms fell straight down. Even if they did not fall to their deaths, many of them were bruised and swollen. There were even people who collided with the demonic mountain and had wounds of different sizes on their bodies. Chapter 2373. Internal strife. These demonic lights seemed to have a strong spirituality as they began to absorb the blood essence of the injured martial artists. Even though these martial artists were releasing their dark force as fast as they could to heal their wounds, they were terrified that no matter how hard they tried to heal their wounds, they would still be unable to heal their wounds. Even if they used precious healing pills that could instantly heal their wounds, they still couldn't escape the fate of having their blood essence sucked away by the demonic mountain. Even the wounds that had already healed started to crumble under the influence of the demonic mountain. Their blood essence flowed out of their wounds like a trickle. The terrified cries of the injured martial artists could be heard everywhere. There were also martial artists who pounced on the caravan in fear and cried for help. However, the caravan didn't save them. They even attacked mercilessly and killed them all. The caravan's actions immediately angered the crowd. After all, many of these injured martial artists had companions or even relatives. These people immediately surrounded the caravan. "Why are you killing people? How are you any different from the demonic dwellers? The Tao Lord of the caravan had a solemn expression as he sneered. Once you enter the demonic mountain and get injured, not only will you lose your blood essence, you will also be affected by the demonic mountain and become demonic. Everyone, check your own condition. If you are injured, leave immediately. Don't force us to attack. As he spoke, the leader of the caravan released his spiritual consciousness and sent a voice transmission to the surrounding area. Where is the demonic dweller commander? We have paid enough money every time we pass by the demonic mountain. Why are you attacking us? We are escorting the treasures of the Sword Palace. His voice reverberated, but no demonic dweller answered. The entire demonic mountain was silent and strange. Suddenly, the injured martial artists who were rejected by the caravan didn't show any gratitude to their friends and relatives who had taken the initiative to ask for help. Instead, their eyes turned red and they roared in despair. We can sense the demon god calling us. Come with us and enter the demonic mountain. Roar. In the end, these injured martial artists no longer spoke in human voices. Instead, they roared like wild beasts. They started to wildly attack any normal person who approached them. At the same time, the more they attacked, the faster their blood essence was lost. Yi Fei was shocked to see that a few of the injured sovereigns had lost too much blood essence in a short period of time. They turned from strong youths into hunched old men. This scene caused even more martial artists to feel fear. Bai Yanran subconsciously began to check if there were any injuries on his body. Mad Dog's expression was solemn. He took a deep breath and said, I finally understand why Field Master said not to approach this demon mountain if there is no need. Yi Fei had a heavy expression on his face as he nodded. This devil mountain was simply too bizarre. As long as they were injured, they would lose their blood essence and even go berserk and attack others. And the crux of the matter was that in a battle between warriors, there would always be injuries. This made the demon mountain a truly dangerous place. It seems like the devil dwellers are determined to deal with us. We can't stay here and wait for death. All those who are not injured, gather together and break out with us. Fellow Taoist over there, please come with us. After waiting for a long time without receiving a reply from the devil dwellers, the Tao lords of the caravan completely gave up on negotiations and focused on breaking out. As Mad Dog was a Tao lord, he was also invited to join the caravan. It wasn't just Mad Dog. The old couple that Yi Fei had seen before was also nervously protecting the little girl. They walked in front of the caravan and tried to break out of the demon mountain. Yi Fei glanced at Bai Yanran and said in a low voice, This demon mountain is too strange. It is not wise to fight here. Bai Yanran and Mad Dog nodded in unison. They suddenly sped up and rushed in the direction of the caravan. The caravan did not stop them. They just blocked all the other martial artists who tried to get close. Let's go. The leader of the caravan, a powerful half-step divine lord, roared and quickly led his men out of the demon mountain to break out of the encirclement. However, at this moment, a burst of cold and strange laughter suddenly came from all around the demon mountain. Everyone from Chiun, since you have already fallen into the demon mountain, why are you in such a hurry to leave? The demon dwellers. What do you want? As long as you do not attack us, we are willing to give you all the treasures that we have escorted this time. The leader of the caravan shouted loudly. Even though he was a half-step divine lord, he could not suppress his fear. After all, this demon mountain was formed by the Demon Path Mountain, which was close to the ancient emperor. Even a divine lord would not be able to escape being absorbed by the demon mountain if he was injured. In the darkness, the strange laughter of the demon dwellers came from all directions. Ha ha ha, we are not interested in your treasures. What we want is one of you and something on that person. If you hand it over, we can consider letting you go. The martial artists present were very surprised. Bai Yanran and Mad Dog looked at Yi Fei together. Yi Fei's heart sank. Could it be that his whereabouts had been discovered? These demon dwellers were also here to snatch his ghost Emperor Cauldron? Who is it? Who among you has offended the demon dwellers? Stand up and surrender on your own accord. Don't harm everyone. The demon dwellers' threat caused the martial artists to fall into chaos. Even the leader of the caravan sternly looked around. But no one made a sound. Many of them looked around in fear. If you don't want to stand up, then don't blame this lord for being ruthless. Everyone, open up your space belt. This lord will search you one by one. I will start with the three of you. The half-step divine lord had no other choice. He decided to forcefully search them. Coincidentally, the first person this half-step divine lord wanted to search was Yi Fei and his two companions. After all, of all the people here, only Yi Fei and his two companions had strange origins. They weren't people from Qiyun, so they couldn't help being suspicious. Bai Yanran and Mad Dog's expressions changed. Yi Fei's heart sank. If they were searched, the secret of the Ghost Emperor Cauldron would be exposed. But if he didn't want to be searched, he would inevitably come into conflict with this half-step divine lord. At that time, in order to protect himself, he would have no choice but to bring out the Ghost Emperor Cauldron. Could it be that the secret of the Ghost Emperor Cauldron will be exposed like this? In Yi Fei's heart, he was already 50% sure that this group of demons might have come for his Ghost Emperor Cauldron. Seeing Yi Fei refuse to open up his space belt, the half-step divine lord's eyes grew increasingly suspicious. But before he could do anything, a Tao lord in the caravan suddenly screamed in rage. At the same time, he slammed his palm into the ground. At some unknown time, a black demon scorpion had appeared on the ground. It quietly crawled up to his foot and stabbed down. Even though that Tao lord had managed to kill it in time, he discovered that even though he had killed the demon scorpion, there was still a bloody wound on his leg. Chapter 2374. Xiao Chao's attitude as the caravan was fighting amongst itself. No one knew that a large group of demon scorpions had broken out of the ground and were stabbing at them. More and more martial artists were struck by the demon scorpions, causing wounds to appear on their bodies. The appearance of these wounds caused the demonic nature of Demon Mountain to burn even hotter. The appearance of these injured martial artists caused the caravan to become even more chaotic. That half-step divine lord didn't even have time to search Yi Fei's body. He only angrily rushed forward and roared, "Why? We've already done as you requested and started investigating these people. Why won't you let us go?" The demon's abnormal attack and the appearance of a large group of demon scorpions caused Yi Fei to have a bad premonition. He couldn't help but sneer. "By attacking you, the demons have already cut off your path to wealth. Do you think the demons will allow you to leave alive and leak this matter?" Bang! In the distance there was the sound of air being torn apart. This was a pitch-black rain of arrows flying towards the half-step divine lord. The half-step divine lord was even more focused. Nearly 2/3 of the demon arrows were aimed at him, causing him to roar in anger. Powerful, profound energy instantly formed a barrier around him, protecting him. But the strange thing was that before those arrows could even get close, they had already exploded. The explosions caused the demon mountain to tremble and space to crack. The explosions caused the half-step divine sovereign's blood to surge, and he nearly vomited blood. But once he vomited blood, the strangeness of Demon Mountain would find him. Even a half-step divine lord wouldn't be able to escape death. That half-step divine lord could only bitterly endure. Soon, he was trapped in place by the endless rain of arrows, unable to support the others. At this time, the demons in the darkness finally moved. They formed groups of 3 to 5 and attacked from the distance. Countless demon insects flew around them, forming a black tide of insects that surged from all directions. The demons had no intention of joining in the battle. Instead, they stood in the distance, laughing as they watched the liveliness. The strangeness of Demon Mountain didn't require the demons to attack. As long as they thought of a way to injure their opponents and make them bleed, they would naturally die here. As the demon insects surged, even more demon scorpions burrowed out from the ground, causing many female martial artists to scream. Bai Yanran was also screaming. In the end, she was a woman and was also afraid of these demon insects. Yi Fei, let's hurry and leave. Bai Yanran dragged Yi Fei and Mad Dog, wanting to flee. She had no hope of fighting. Mad Dog groaned, there are demon insects all around us. We can't escape. That might not be the case. Although there are many of these demonic insects, their cultivation levels are very low. Many of them haven't even reached the sovereign realm. Perhaps I have a way to poison them to death. Yi Fei stroked his chin. The first thing that came to his mind was the dragon turtle. Blackie, spray poison wind. Yi Fei threw out the dragon turtle, and then called Bai Yanran and the Mad Dog to jump on the back of the dragon turtle. Seeing the overwhelming tide of insects outside, the dragon turtle was almost scared to death. It hurriedly used all its strength to spray out a green poisonous wind. When the nearby demon insects entered the poisonous wind, their bodies suddenly trembled, and they fell straight to the ground and were instantly poisoned to death. Roar! When the dragon tortoise discovered that the demonic insects were so useless, it suddenly became as spirited as a ferocious tiger. While it spat out poisonous wind, it did not forget to pick up some fat insects to taste. The many demons at the periphery were stunned when they saw this. Is that a pig? A turtle? Or a monster? Who cares what it is? We have to kill it. Otherwise, all the demon insects will be poisoned to death. Some of the demons had already started roaring. After all, it took a lot of energy to rear demon insects. The dragon turtle's poison wind killed a large number of them. Who could bear that? Half of the demon arrows that were attacking half-step divine lords suddenly flew over. Yi Fei sneered. 2 Taiji sword cauldrons appeared behind him and shot into the sky to block the rain of arrows. At the same time, he touched his spatial belt and a black demon bow appeared in his hand. He quickly drew the bow. The arrow was like a full moon. It suddenly pierced through the rain of arrows and pierced through the head of a demon lord of heaven. The demons were in an uproar. This was the first time someone had killed their clansmen on Demon Mountain. There were even people who recognized Yi Fei's demon bow. It belonged to the demon race. Kill him! Kill that black turtle! The demons were furious. Some of the more powerful demon Dao lords even charged over from afar. Roar! At this moment, a huge commotion broke out in the merchant group. The 2 Dao lords who were injured by the devil scorpion could no longer suppress the loss of blood essence in their bodies. The strangeness of the Devil Mountain soon drove them crazy. They actually began to attack the people of the other merchant group. This sudden turn of events caused the caravan to become even more chaotic. There were already people who were unable to withstand the pressure and began to scatter in all directions. Unfortunately, they were surrounded by devilish insects, so if they stayed together, they would be able to hold on. If they split up, they would only die faster. Yi Fei saw with his own eyes that a young girl not far away turned into a white-haired old woman after running a few steps. In the end, her entire body was covered by demon insects and completely devoured. Bai Yanran's face turned pale when he saw what happened to the young girl. He suddenly shouted at Yi Fei seriously, "Yi Fei, if I become like that, you must kill me immediately." "Don't worry, I won't kill you. We will definitely break out of this demon mountain. Big Black, lead the way. Big Brother Jifeng, we will cover you together," Yi Fei said in a low voice. Mad Dog didn't say much. He just waved his crazy claws across the air and tore all the demon arrows that came close to him. Yi Fei, on the other hand, raised his demonic bow and shot the heavenly monarch demon cultivator behind the demonic insect. At this moment, Xiao Chao was also awakened by him. She opened her divine eyes of heaven and earth, and looked for the most suitable weak spot to break through. Not far away, there was a sudden cry of a little girl. The dragon turtle subconsciously stopped in its tracks. Yi Fei also looked back nervously. He saw that not far away, the young girl they met on the flying boat was surrounded by countless demon scorpions. However, those demon scorpions were only surrounding her, but they were strangely attacking her. They formed a torrent that separated the young girl and the old couple. The dragon turtle suddenly became hesitant. It turned its head and glanced at Yi Fei. Yi Fei was also struggling. Mad Dog suddenly reminded him, "If we go back, we will fall into an even deeper encirclement. Even so, we can't just watch a young girl die and not save her." Bai Yanran was more emotional. She could choose not to save the other warriors, but she couldn't bear to see a young girl without any cultivation die just like that. "Xiao Chao, what do you think?" Yi Fei asked Xiao Chao again. When he saw that the young girl, who was about the same age as him, might die, Xiao Chao's attitude was very firm. "All right, since you want to save Xiao Chao, then we will kill our way back." Yi Fei laughed. Although he didn't want to meddle in other people's business, Xiao Chao's attitude had undoubtedly strengthened his determination. Moreover, the dragon turtle had almost finished all of the little girl's snacks on the flying boat. These snacks couldn't be eaten for free. Chapter 2375. Entrusting the orphan Yi Fei's decision undoubtedly roused the dragon turtle. The poisonous wind in its mouth became even more ferocious. It actually formed a special green blade light that slashed forward, creating a gap in the insect tide. Following this gap, the dragon turtle finally succeeded in rushing to the little girl's side. The little girl looked at the dragon turtle that was charging towards her in surprise. There was no smile on her face, but a look of sorrow and hope flashed across her face. Suddenly, the little girl did something. She knelt down and cried as she begged, "Please, I'm not afraid of death, but I don't want my grandparents to die. Please, save them." The grandparents the little girl mentioned were the Tao Lord couple who had protected her. Although the little girl had no cultivation, her identity was not ordinary. Mad Dog smiled bitterly and shook his head. Not only are the old couple surrounded by insects, but they are also under heavy fire from the demons. I'm not confident that I can save them. Besides, there were some things that Mad Dog didn't say. Yi Fei also sighed. However, when he saw the little girl's pleading eyes, Yi Fei still gritted his teeth. He suddenly grabbed the little girl from a distance and placed her on the dragon turtle's back. "You and the dragon turtle go first. I'll go save the old couple." Since he was already here, he couldn't possibly save only half of them. Therefore, Yi Fei could only activate his golden body of despair and rush in the direction of the old couple. Sensing Yi Fei's actions, the old couple was grateful. Suddenly, they looked at each other and made a decision. "Old man, it seems that we have wronged this young man. He might be a good person. Whether he is a good person or a bad person, he is the only hope to save the young miss. We can die, but nothing can happen to the young miss. Young man, this old man begs you. Take this token and head to the Sword Palace. The Sword Palace will thank you." As the old man spoke, he ignored the whistling devil arrows stabbing into his body. With a wave of his palm, he blasted the sky full of devil insects into a vacuum. The old woman, tears streaming down her face, suddenly threw a sword-shaped command medallion into Yi Fei's hand. The demons in the distance clearly noticed this scene. A demon Tao Lord roared furiously, "That's the medallion! Don't let them escape. If we can't capture them alive, we'd rather kill them by mistake." Boom! The void trembled. A demon Tao Lord had already charged over. Yi Fei held the token in a daze. He had thought that these demons were here to fight for the Ghost Emperor Cauldron. Now, it seemed that they were here to capture the little girl. Who exactly is this little girl? She clearly doesn't have any cultivation, but she's worth this old couple protecting her with their lives? Yi Fei looked at the old couple. Seniors, aren't you coming with us? It's too late. We were seriously injured before entering the Demon Mountain. After entering the Demon Mountain, our injuries have worsened. Now that we have a benefactor to protect the young miss, it's time for the old and decrepit to go down and follow the old master. As he spoke, the old man's body suddenly swayed. He was already injured, and after being shot by the demonic arrow, his body could not hold on any longer. The demonic Tao lords that were charging over saw an opportunity and laughed sinisterly. Suddenly, they shot a few beams of mystique light towards them. However, these mystiques did not harm the old man. At the critical moment, the similarly injured old woman rushed to the front and blocked these attacks for the old man. Xiao Mei! The old man roared like an injured beast. The wrinkles on his face trembled violently. Brother, I'm going. We were born together, and we will die together. The old woman's pained voice came from the divine light that filled the sky. All right, we will be together. Whether in heaven or hell, we will never be separated. The old man shed tears of blood as he charged into the demonic light that filled the sky. At this moment, the old woman's body was being bitten and clung to by countless demonic insects. Only her aged hand slowly reached out and held the old man's hand tightly. The little girl's heart-wrenching cries came from the back of the dragon turtle. On the ground, Yi Fei also gripped the token tightly, unable to speak. He only knew that he would never be able to forget this old couple. He couldn't refuse their request before they died. They wanted him to bring the little girl to the Sword Palace. Seniors, take care. After bowing deeply, Yi Fei suddenly broke into a run. He knocked away countless demonic insects and returned to the back of the dragon turtle. Bai Yanran had already covered the little girl's eyes. He could not bear to let her see the cruelest scene. Blackie, let's go. Squeak. Vaguely, Bai Yanran and Mad Dog seemed to hear the voice of another little girl. In the space of the beast mark, Xiao Chao was wiping his tears. On the ground, the dragon turtle was running with all its might. It kept spitting out poisonous wind from its mouth. It poisoned all the demonic insects that came close and trampled them to death. Suddenly, Yi Fei felt the entire demon mountain shake violently. Then, two earth-shattering explosions came from behind him. Some demonic Tao lords let out shrill cries. Yi Fei's heart trembled slightly. He resisted the urge to turn around. In silence, he raised his demonic bow again and shot forward. A demonic person who was controlling the demonic insects suddenly felt a chill in his chest. His body slowly fell to the ground. This demonic person's corpse was quickly covered by countless demonic insects. Then, these insects were blown away by the dragon turtle's poisonous wind. In the distance, they could already see the light before dawn. On the ground, the dragon turtle was running wildly. It was getting further and further away from the Demon Mountain. Finally, just as the sun rose outside the Demon Mountain, Yi Fei and the rest ran completely out of the Demon Mountain. The dragon turtle immediately collapsed on the ground in exhaustion, panting heavily. Even so, the dragon turtle quickly turned its head to check on the condition of the little girl on its back. When it realized that the little girl was only tired from crying and had fallen into a deep sleep, the dragon turtle heaved a long sigh of relief. Yi Fei, what should we do now? Bai Yanran carried the little girl, not knowing what to do. Go to the Sword Palace. This is my promise to the old couple. No matter what, I must fulfill it. Yi Fei held the token tightly in his hand. Mad Dog's expression was crazy as he stared in the direction of the Demon Mountain. One day, I will use this Demon Mountain as a sacrifice to these dead souls. There were more than 300 people on the same ship, but in the end, only they and a little girl managed to escape from the Devil Mountain. Yi Fei could understand this heavy feeling, but in the end, he shook his head and dispelled the Mad Dog's thoughts. Big Brother Ji Feng, this is not our enmity, but her enmity. One day, she will personally come here and destroy this Devil Mountain as a sacrifice to the old couple. Mad Dog was stunned. However, when he saw the little girl's tear-stained face, he nodded subconsciously. You are right. This is the only way for her to live better and work harder. Chapter 2376. City of 10,000 Swords. In the Divine Prefecture, every lord-level city was surrounded by countless small and large countries. These countries were the vassals of the city. All the majestic cities were affiliated to the Red Moon Holy Dynasty. With so many countries and majestic cities, the number of things that happened every day was innumerable. The destruction of Chiyun's caravan was a small matter. It would only spread to the small countries nearby, but not to the huge city of 10,000 swords. Although it was called a city, any family from the city of 10,000 swords could establish a sect in the outside world. Because, just like the city of divine kings, the city of 10,000 swords had countless downlords, and divine lords were not rare. Occasionally, one would even see Renzu's chariot passing by in the sky. Of course, in the city of 10,000 swords, except for divine lords and Renzu, ordinary martial artists were not allowed to fly. This was the rule set by the Sword Palace. At the same time, the city of 10,000 swords was a paradise for swordsmen. Most of the people here were swordsmen. Not only the disciples of the Sword Palace, but many swordsmen from other regions also came to the city of 10,000 swords to train their swordsmanship. This city of 10,000 swords is truly flourishing. If I have the chance in the future, I'll take a look at it. If there is a chance, I can bring Xiaochan here to train. After so many years, Yi Fei had only accepted one disciple, and that was Yi Xiaochan. Yi Xiaochan was also very capable. She could cultivate without Yi Fei's guidance. Xiaochan's only shortcoming is that she does not have a special bloodline. It seems that as her master, I have to think of a way. Yi Fei thought to himself. His disciple could not be weaker than others. The first thing he did after entering the city of 10,000 swords was not to go to the Sword Palace, but to the stall selling Tonghulu. In one breath, he bought tens of thousands of Tonghulu, which attracted the attention of Bai Yanran and Mad Dog. Even Xiao Rou looked at Yi Fei strangely. Xiao Rou was the name of the little girl that Yi Fei had saved. In order to help the little girl recover from the grief of her husband's death in battle, Yi Fei had deliberately delayed the journey. It took him a few months to reach the city of 10,000 swords. After this period of recuperation, Xiao Rou gradually walked out of her sadness. Seeing Yi Fei by so many candied haws, Xiao Rou was a little embarrassed and said, "Uncle Yi, I don't like sweet things." Yi Fei's face darkened. He pointed at the dragon turtle with a straight face and said, "Uncle didn't buy it for you. It's for the dragon turtle." The dragon turtle nodded with tears in his eyes and said gruffly. It attracted the attention of many passers-by. Ruru's face immediately turned red, attracting Bai Yanran's dissatisfied gaze. "We don't want you to buy anything for us. Ruru, what do you like? I'll buy it for you." "Thank you, Sister Bai," Xiao Rou said sweetly. Bai Yanran was overjoyed. He immediately grabbed Xiao Rou and wanted to go shopping. Yi Fei's face darkened. Mad Dog was also on guard. He hurriedly reminded, "Bai Yanran, should we go to the Sword Palace first and find Ruru's father?" After saving the little girl, Yi Fei was surprised to learn that Ruru's father seemed to have a very high status in the Sword Palace. This was also the reason why Ruru had two Dao lords protecting her even though she didn't cultivate. Moreover, Yi Fei didn't forget that he had come to the Sword Palace to complete the Nine Heavens Sword Master's request. The Nine Heavens Sword Master had helped him a lot in the Earth Realm. The Undying Sword Soul was his most important trump card. In Yi Fei's heart, it was even more important than the Ghost Emperor Cauldron. Only then did Bai Yanran give up. He said unhappily, "Then let's continue shopping after we meet Ruru's father." This time, not only did Yi Fei's face darken, but even Mad Dog was speechless. Then Yi Fei and Mad Dog tacitly pretended not to hear, and the two quickly walked forward together. The Sword Palace's location was also very easy to find, because the entire second half of the City of 10,000 Swords was a huge divine sword stabbed into the ground. Bai Yanran pointed at the huge divine sword and said, I once heard Patriarch Pan Wang say that this sword in the City of 10,000 Swords is a real divine sword. Its origins are even older than the divine dynasty. Later, the Sword Palace gradually developed with this divine sword as the foundation. Then, did Pan Wang mention anything about the Nine Heavens Sword Master? Yi Fei asked hurriedly, but what he saw was Bai Yanran's blank expression. The Sword Palace has never had a Sword Master. The Sword Palace is divided into the inner and outer parts. Currently, the outer part of the Sword Palace is stronger than the inner part. That's all I know. Bai Yanran spread his hands. This made Yi Fei feel a little depressed. The Nine Heavens Sword Master was once the master of the Sword Palace. Why was there no news of him in the outside world? The three of them continued to walk forward. Rur hugged the dragon turtle and looked nervously at the huge divine sword. The divine sword was getting bigger and bigger. Vaguely, there was a strong pressure from the sword. Inside the heavenly palace, the indestructible sword token that Yi Fei's divine soul was holding gave off a joyful aura when it sensed this aura. Stop. The Sword Palace is an important place. Those who are not disciples of the Sword Palace are not allowed to enter. At the entrance of the Sword Palace stood two young swordsmen who were full of heroic spirit. They both carried long swords on their backs and had a strong aura. Yi Fei nodded secretly. Holding Rur's hand with Bai Yanran, he walked forward and said, I am under the orders of two elders to bring this girl here to acknowledge her ancestry. Please inform them. Yi Fei's words shocked the two disciples of the Sword Palace. They looked at Ruru in shock, then looked at Yi Fei. Are you serious? If you lie, the Sword Palace will punish you severely. If I lie, I am willing to accept the punishment. Yi Fei cupped his hands solemnly, and habitually revealed a simple smile. The two disciples of the Sword Palace were immediately influenced. They judged Yi Fei to be an honest person, and his words were most likely true. Their attitudes softened. One of them said politely, Please wait for a moment. I will go and report this to the elders. As he spoke, he hurriedly turned and ran into the Sword Palace. But just as he ran into the entrance, a group of white-robed swordsmen walked out. That person hurriedly avoided them and said, Greetings, senior brothers. Who is outside? Why are you in such a hurry? One of the white-robed swordsmen asked casually. It's someone called Yi Fei. He brought a little girl with him. He said that she is a descendant of the Sword Palace who has been wandering outside. She is here to acknowledge her ancestry. We were just about to inform the elders. The disciple replied honestly. The other white-robed swordsman did not think much of it. After all, the Sword Palace was a large organization. Just the number of disciples alone was in the hundreds of thousands. It was not strange for a descendant to wander outside. However, the white-robed swordsman who asked the question could not help but frown. Yi Fei. I seem to have heard this name somewhere before. Oh right, isn't this Supreme Emperor Heaven? Isn't that country bumpkin from the heavenly pool ancient land called Yi Fei? Boom! Chapter 2377. Unsheathing the Sword, as expected, it's you. It's been a few years since we last met, but not only have you not improved, you even dare to come to my Sword Palace to deceive people. Do you think that the swords of my Sword Palace are bad for you? The white-clothed swordsman's murderous aura made Yi Fei very suspicious. Have we met before? Yi Fei's words enraged the white-clothed swordsman even more. He was so angry that smoke was coming out of his 7 orifices. He coldly reminded Yi Fei, Supreme Emperor Heaven, Heavenly Pool Ancient Land. Do you remember now? Yi Fei suddenly understood. No wonder this white-clothed swordsman looked familiar. This person was one of the swordsmen he had defeated in Supreme Emperor Heaven. Sorry, I think you misunderstood. I still don't remember. I also haven't been to Supreme Emperor Heaven, Yi Fei calmly denied. After all, he had brought Xiao Rou here to acknowledge her ancestors. It would be best if he didn't have a conflict with the Sword Palace. He wanted to brush this matter aside, but the white-clothed swordsman clearly had no intention of letting Yi Fei go. He coldly said, "Yimo, don't even think about denying it. You're just a remnant of the heavenly palace of despair. Who knows if the little girl you brought back is really a descendant of the Sword Palace? Men, chase them away." The white-clothed swordsman had always been brooding over the fact that he had been defeated by Yi Fei in Supreme Emperor Heaven. Now that there was a chance to teach Yi Fei a lesson, he naturally wouldn't let it go. The nearby disciples of the Sword Palace also subconsciously stood on the white-clothed swordsman's side. They stared at Yi Fei with an unfriendly expression. However, since they were at the entrance of the Sword Palace, they couldn't make a move. Only the white-clothed swordsman coldly spat out a word, "Scram." Boom. A sword light suddenly appeared and suppressed the void. Yi Fei stood with his heavy black iron sword. His sword was as heavy as a mountain and filled with an invisible pressure. This pressure even resonated with the swords in the hands of all the swordsmen present. Following Yi Fei's soft whistle, the swords of the nearby disciples of the Sword Palace suddenly trembled and left their scabbards. They gathered above Yi Fei's head like meteors and formed a terrifying cloud of sword qi. "It's been a long time since I've released my sword soul. Yi Fei, I've brought the descendants of the Sword Palace to acknowledge their ancestors." Yi Fei's last time Yi Fei's. His voice was like thunder and directly past the white-clothed swordsman Yi. This was Yi Fei's method. He was too lazy to explain and directly used his sword to force out the person in charge of the Sword Palace. None of the swordsmen present expected Yi Fei to suddenly release the fledgling form of his sword soul and take away their swords. One had to know that the way of the sword was different from other martial arts. When other martial arts were cultivated to the limit, one could comprehend the will of a divine ability. But when the way of the sword was cultivated to a certain limit, what one could comprehend was the sword's soul. Even though Yi Fei only grasped the fledgling form of the undying sword soul, it still had a terrifying suppressive power over the swords of others. The white-clothed swordsman's sword was also suddenly taken away by Yi Fei. He was immediately enraged. Without any hesitation, the large group of Sword Palace disciples all released their fledgling forms of their sword souls. Suddenly, they formed a formless wave of sword qi and fiercely collided with Yi Fei. Yi Fei was not afraid. It had been a long time since he had experienced a battle of the way of the sword. Right now, he could use these people to test his level of the way of the sword. Boom! An even stronger and fiercer aura of the sword soul suddenly exploded from Yi Fei's body. Yi Fei did not stop walking. He only held Xiao Rou's hand and strode forward. "Whoever dares to stop me, these swords will be your example. You better not force me to draw my sword." With a series of bangs, the swords that had been taken away by Yi Fei suddenly dimmed and were turned into piles of scrap metal by the aura of the undying sword soul. The white-clothed swordsman and the Sword Palace disciples' faces all changed. They did not expect that Yi Fei had not only comprehended the fledgling form of the sword soul, but also that it was so strong. He had directly blocked the attack of all their fledgling forms of sword souls alone. The white-clothed swordsman was so angry that his face was distorted. "If we had entered the heavenly lake ancient land and received the baptism of the ancient emperor's origin, my achievements would only be greater than this person's. Quickly report that someone has openly drawn his sword and is trying to disrespect the Sword Palace." Realizing that Yi Fei was even stronger than before, the white-clothed swordsman clearly did not dare to attack Yi Fei. However, he had achieved his goal. Yi Fei's drawing of his sword in the Sword Palace was a provocation to the dignity of the Sword Palace, regardless of the reason. Who are you? Do you know the consequences of drawing your sword in the Sword Palace? A divine lord from the Sword Palace was actually alarmed and walked out personally. This made the white-clothed swordsman overjoyed. He quickly added fuel to the fire. Greetings, Martial Uncle Nyo. This person not only drew his sword in the Sword Palace, he is also a surviving member of the Heavenly Palace of Despair. The divine lord that appeared looked at Yi Fei with even more surprise. This made Bai Yanran and Mad Dog a little nervous. Why did you draw your sword in the Sword Palace just now? The divine lord actually ignored Yi Fei's identity. His eyes were filled with hope as he looked at Xiao, who was beside Yi Fei. Yi Fei's heart skipped a beat. He knew that the divine lord must have heard his words. At the same time, the divine lord did not have any prejudice against the Heavenly Palace of Despair. I drew my sword because I have the bloodline of the Sword Palace in me. I was once asked by an old couple to escort Xiao here. However, I was stopped and suspected by the disciples of the Sword Palace. I was displeased and drew my sword. Please forgive me if I was disrespectful. Yi Fei's attitude was very humble. The divine Lord Nyo How could not help but think highly of Yi Fei. He continued asking without batting an eyelid, "You mentioned the bloodline of the Sword Palace. Do you have any evidence to prove her identity?" "Yes. The old couple once gave me a token." Yi Fei thought for a moment before taking out the sword-shaped token. "Renzu's token? How is that possible? This must be fake." The white-clothed swordsman was in disbelief. He subconsciously could not believe it. The divine Lord Nyo Hao's eyes suddenly brightened. He laughed and said, "That's right. This is Renzu's token. The token of the Sword Palace's Renzu. You should be the Lord's daughter, Jiang Xiao. Ever since the Lord received news about you, he specially sent people to pick you up. However, several months ago there was no news of you at all. The Lord was so frightened that he almost left the palace to search for clues about you. By the way, didn't the intelligence say that a pair of Tao Lords would escort Miss Ro to the Sword Palace? Where is the old couple?" The divine Lord Nyo Hao looked at Yi Fei and the other two. He could not help but feel puzzled. The divine Lord Yi Fei shook his head and sighed. The two seniors were besieged by the demon dwellers on Demon Mountain and have already fallen. Before they died, they entrusted me with the task of bringing Xiao to the Sword Palace. He immediately recounted what happened on Demon Mountain. The divine Lord Nyo Hao's expression changed. "What? Mere demon dwellers dared to attack the bloodline of the Sword Palace? Very good. No wonder there was no news of you for several months. Don't worry, Miss Ro. The old couple will not die in vain. The Sword Palace will make the demon dwellers of Demon Mountain pay the price in blood." Chapter 2378. Deliberately targeted, the nearby disciples of the Sword Palace were stunned. It was hard to imagine that a little girl would say such words. But when Nyo Hao heard this, he laughed loudly. "Well said, as expected of Renzu's daughter. Don't worry, Miss Ro. As long as you meet your father and receive guidance from Renzu, you will have the chance to take revenge with your own hand." Nyo Hao then looked at Yi Fei, Bai Yanran and Mad Dog. "The Sword Palace's outer palace is very grateful that you were able to escort Miss Ro here. However, right now, I will be bringing Miss Ro to meet the human ancestor and acknowledge her ancestry. Esteemed guests, please rest in the VIP pavilion for a few days." In the Sword Palace, acknowledging one's ancestry was not a small matter. It was not only a recognition of one's status, but also a bloodline awakening. Especially since Jiang Xiao was Renzu's daughter. After Nyo Hao finished speaking, he walked over to take Jiang Xiao away. The little girl was very nervous. She subconsciously grabbed Yi Fei's clothes and hugged the dragon turtle tightly. Yi Fei smiled and encouraged her. Xiaoro, don't worry. We will stay here and wait for you to acknowledge your ancestry. The little girl reluctantly put down the dragon turtle and walked timidly to Niu Hao's side. Niu Hao was very polite. As he comforted the little girl in a low voice, he didn't forget to instruct the two Dao lords who came out later. These three are the Sword Palace's honored guests. Treat them well and don't neglect them. When Niu Hao said that, he glanced at the white-clothed swordsman. Just this glance caused the white-clothed swordsman's body to go limp. His face was ashen as he fell to the ground. His heart was filled with endless regret. This dramatic turn of events stunned the other Sword Palace disciples. No one expected that the little girl Yi Fei brought here would have such an identity. She was Renzu's daughter. Just this identity alone was enough to make people faint. No one else dared to stop Yi Fei. Many people even looked at the paralyzed white-clothed swordsman sympathetically and quietly distanced themselves from him. Yi Fei did not even look at the white-clothed swordsman. He would usually choose to ignore opponents whose names he could not even remember. Besides, Yi Fei had no interest in attacking a fellow whose legs turned to jelly after being glared at by a divine lord. He only calmly walked into the Sword Palace under the white-robed swordsman's regretful and horrified gaze. Looking at the little girl being taken away by Niu Hao, Bai Yanran was both disappointed and worried. Yi Fei, is it really okay for us to let a little girl live in hatred? Living in hatred is better than living in fear. I believe that Rur will become stronger and stronger. By the way, seniors, since Ruru is Renzu's daughter, why is she wandering outside and almost being hunted down by demons? Yi Fei could not help but ask curiously. The young Dao Lord who was receiving them could not help but have a strange expression. Why don't you know? Sword Guardian Renzu was the most promiscuous when he was young. How many children did he have outside? I think even he himself. Silence. The other older Dao Lord suddenly shouted coldly. With a stern face, he lectured Yi Fei. The three of you don't think that you can achieve meteoric success just because you escorted that little girl back. If she can't awaken a high-level bloodline during the ancestral recognition ceremony, the rewards you will receive will be limited. Therefore, after entering the VIP pavilion, you'd better not wander around. Be obedient and wait for Renzu to summon you. As they spoke, the two Dao Lords had already brought Yi Fei and the other two to a magnificent palace. This palace was the VIP pavilion. There were countless pavilions and luxurious decorations. It was the Sword Palace, a place specially used to receive VIPs. The two Dao Lords escorted them here and then left. Then, a slightly plump steward walked up coldly. He sized up the three of them and said, I heard that the three of you actually saved Sword Guardian Renzu's daughter. You're really lucky. Not at all. We were asked to do our job. Senior, I have something I'd like to ask about. The two Dao Lords were tight-lipped just now. Yi Fei could not ask about the Ninth Heaven Sword Master. He decided to use this plump steward as a breakthrough point. However, the plump steward did not have any intention of responding to Yi Fei. He waved his hand coldly and said, I'm not free. This is your room number. Take it and go behind the mountain in the east to find it. There were mountains and rivers in the VIP pavilion. Following the plump steward's instructions, Yi Fei suppressed his anger and went to his room. However, when he saw it, Yi Fei's expression changed. Mad Dog was so angry that the veins on his forehead were bulging. We went through so much trouble to save Sword Guardian Renzu's daughter. In the end, the Sword Palace made us stay in a thatched hut. That's right. The plump steward had assigned them a thatched hut, the kind where the three of them could squeeze together. Mad Dog was not the only one who was angry. Bai Yanran was also frowning. The Sword Palace is treating us like this. I'm suddenly worried about whether Ruru will be able to live a good life in the Sword Palace, Bai Yanran said worriedly. We don't have to worry about Ruru. After all, she is Renzu's daughter. Lord Niu Hao's care for her doesn't seem fake, Yi Fei said with certainty. Mad Dog pointed coldly at the thatched hut in front of them. Then how do you explain this? Yi Fei, could it be that you've offended someone again? Yi Fei broke out in a cold sweat. He was depressed to find that he couldn't find any words to refute him. After all, it was obvious that they were being deliberately targeted in the current situation. However, in the Sword Palace, he seemed to have only had a conflict with the white-robed swordsman. And the white-robed swordsman didn't seem like someone with such power. But other than this person, Yi Fei couldn't think of anyone else he could have offended in the Sword Palace. Bai Yanran said angrily, "Since Ruru is fine, let's go. We don't have to suffer here." No. Yi Fei was shocked. He came to the Sword Palace to escort Jiang Ruru back to her ancestral home. His main purpose was to investigate the relationship between the Ninth Heaven Sword Master and the Sword Palace. How could he leave so easily at this time? Thinking of this, Yi Fei gritted his teeth and looked at Mad Dog. "Brother Jifeng, please go out and spread the news that we rescued Ruru. It's best if everyone knows about it." Although doing this was a bit of an act of blackmail, if the news spread, no one in the Sword Palace would dare to take the risk of repaying kindness with enmity and hurt them. The effect of Mad Dog's actions even exceeded Yi Fei's expectations. When the news spread throughout the city of 10,000 swords that someone had rescued Renzu's daughter, the fat manager of the VIP pavilion immediately ran over to Yi Fei, sweating profusely. He nodded and bowed to Yi Fei and desperately explained that he had arranged the wrong room. On the same day, the fat manager vacated 3 of the best rooms for Yi Fei and the others to live in. Even the dragon turtle was treated like a national treasure. Every day, it would open its mouth to eat. Yi Fei and Xiao Chao were very impressed and had the urge to starve the dragon turtle for 10 meals. The 3 cultivators and the tortoise were enjoying their meals and accommodations in the VIP pavilion. The only thing that Yi Fei found strange was that the sword protector had yet to summon them. Even Xiao Rou was nowhere to be found. When he asked the plump manager about it, he was completely clueless about it. Chapter 2379. Death to Trespassers. The fat manager walked over with a radiant smile. "Congratulations, Miss Rou. You've already obtained the recognition of the higher-ups. Your contributions are also very great. The Palace Lord has specially ordered for you. The Palace Lord has ordered me to bring you to meet him." "Thank you for your trouble." Yi Fei cupped his hands politely. Although this fat manager was a bit snobbish, the faster he could get in touch with the higher-ups of the Sword Palace, the more likely he would be able to find out about the Ninth Heaven Sword Master. Yi Fei naturally wouldn't let go of such an opportunity. Soon, he, Bai Yanran, and Mad Dog followed the fat manager out of the VIP pavilion and headed deeper into the Sword Palace. Along the way, many disciples of the Sword Palace looked at them in surprise. However, the fat manager obviously had a certain status in the Sword Palace, so no one stopped them along the way. Perhaps it was because Jiang Xiaorou's identity had been confirmed, or perhaps it was because of Mad Dog's rumors, but the fat manager didn't dare to slight Yi Fei and was very polite along the way. Seeing this, Yi Fei's heart skipped a beat. He took the opportunity to ask, "Senior, I heard that the Palace Lord of the Sword Palace is the Ninth Heaven Sword Master. Are we going to meet her now?" "What Ninth Heaven Sword Master? Kid, don't talk nonsense if you don't know." The fat manager's expression changed when he heard this. It was as if the Ninth Heaven Sword Master was a taboo in the Sword Palace. Yi Fei was puzzled. He could only shrug and say, "When I was in Qingzhou, I heard that the strongest person in the Sword Palace was the Ninth Heaven Sword Master." Qingzhou, the fat manager almost laughed out loud. He had been wary of Yi Fei earlier, but when he heard that Yi Fei was from a small place like Qingzhou, he relaxed a lot. He sneered. "Your information is too outdated. Remember, there's no Ninth Heaven Sword Master in the Sword Palace now. Don't ask too much. Be careful." After saying that, the fat manager quickened his pace. Yi Fei was very angry. If he had been looking forward to the Sword Palace before coming here, his expectations now were very small. And they had become very small. Bai Yanran was still worried about Jiang Xiaorou's situation when he saw that the fat manager had suddenly become easy to talk to. He couldn't help but ask, "Manager, how is Xiaorou? When will we be able to meet her?" "You don't have to worry about Miss Rou. She is doing very well in the Sword Palace. The Sword Protector forefather has already confirmed her identity. From now on, Miss Rou will be a direct descendant of the Sword Palace." The fat manager's tone became much more respectful when he mentioned Jiang Xiaorou. Yi Fei's heart skipped a beat. He suddenly asked, after Xiaorou returned to the clan, what grade of bloodline did she awaken? Yi Fei knew that it wasn't just the status of a direct descendant that could make the fat manager so respectful. Miss Rou awakened the 9th grade Sky Sword bloodline. This bloodline is very rare in the Sword Palace. That's why the Palace Lord has summoned you. The Palace Lord will definitely reward you handsomely for bringing back such a sword genius to the Sword Palace, the fat manager said enviously. Bai Yanran and the Mad Dog were both dumbfounded. They didn't expect that the little girl they had casually saved would have such a strong talent. Yi Fei frowned. Jiang Xiaorou's bloodline talent was so strong that the Sword Palace should have protected her with all its might. However, the truth was that when he had met the little girl, Jiang Xiaorou, she had only been protected by 2 elderly Dao Lords. This was a far cry from her innate bloodline talent. Moreover, there were demons in the Sword Palace's territory who dared to attack and capture Jiang Xiaorou. This made things even stranger. No matter what's going on, Xiaorou was able to return to the Sword Palace and awaken the 9th grade Sky Sword bloodline. At least I have something to say to the elderly Dao Lord couple, Yi Fei thought to himself. In the beast mark space, Xiao Chao and the dragon turtle pricked up their ears. When they heard that Jiang Xiaorou was fine and was living well, Xiao Chao patted the dragon turtle and continued to happily eat the candied haws. At this time, Yi Fei and the other two had also passed through layers upon layers of winding corridors, palaces, and arrived in front of a majestic sword gate. That sword gate was actually the city of 10,000 swords, the godly sword that pierced half of the city. The divine sword stretched for hundreds of thousands of miles. It was like a sword mountain that was inserted into the ground and towered into the clouds. The gate to enter the divine sword was the sword gate in front of Yi Fei. "The 3 of you, the Palace Lord is waiting for you inside. Please enter." The fat manager stood in front of the sword gate with a solemn expression and invited them. Bai Yanran was a little hesitant. Mad Dog asked coldly, "Why don't you go in first?" The fat manager smiled bitterly and shook his head. "In the Sword Palace, I'm just an insignificant person. There are at least 8,000 managers like me. How can I enter the sword gate so easily? On the other hand, if you hadn't made a great contribution this time, the Palace Lord wouldn't have summoned you to the sword gate." These words were reasonable. Bai Yanran and Mad Dog let down their guard and looked up at Yi Fei. Yi Fei nodded slightly. In any case, with their strength, there was no way they could escape from the Sword Palace. Instead of making excuses, they might as well go in and take a look. With this thought in mind, Yi Fei took the lead and walked into the sword gate. Bai Yanran and Mad Dog hurriedly followed. The 3 of them walked into the sword gate. The fat manager suddenly spat on the ground. "Tui! 3 bumpkins. You don't even know the layout of the Sword Palace. How dare you casually bring that little girl back?" Boom! 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 Sword light flashed within the sword gate. Sword Palace disciples were everywhere, fighting each other. There were also many young Dao Lords with powerful auras watching the battle nearby or giving guidance to their junior brothers and sisters. At the very front of the sword gate, there was a line of eye-catching words written in blood. Those who trespass into the sword gate die. Yi Fei's group's entrance gave many people a fright. They don't seem to be Sword Palace disciples. Someone discovered that Yi Fei's group was unfamiliar. They weren't wearing Sword Palace attire either. These words immediately caused a stir among the disciples of the Sword Gate. There were actually outsiders who had barged into the Sword Gate? Bai Yanran and Mad Dog were even more stunned. Didn't you say that the Sword Palace Lord would receive us? Why are there so many Sword Palace disciples here? Ha ha, have you all gone mad? Throughout history, only divine lords have been received by the Sword Palace Lord. The Sword Gate is an important place of the Sword Palace. Outsiders who aren't disciples of the Sword Palace are not allowed to enter. A young man with a sword on his back walked over from the crowd. His entire body was covered in sword light, giving off a strong sense of oppression. His cold gaze swept over Yi Fei. When he saw Bai Yanran, the young man's eyes clearly brightened. He actually directly scanned Bai Yanran's body. Bai Yanran's heart immediately burned with anger. He turned to Yi Fei and said, "Yi Fei, I don't want to stay here anymore. If you don't want to stay, then let's go." Yi Fei nodded. The situation in the Sword Gate made him understand that the fat manager had obviously tricked them. The Sword Palace Lord's summons was also obviously a lie. Chapter 2380. Sword Dao Crush. Yi Fei turned around and left, ignoring the people of Sword Gate and the white-robed youth. The youth's expression was extremely gloomy. Many of the Sword Palace disciples also had cold smiles on their faces. These three people are really bold. They didn't know anything and just barged into Sword Gate. They even dared to ignore senior brother Ma Yuan. Haha, maybe this is what they mean by the ignorant being fearless. There were also disciples of Sword Gate who sneered. They didn't give Yi Fei a chance to leave at all. With a whoosh, the sound of swords could be heard everywhere. Countless swords had already shot out from all directions like a dense rainstorm. They surrounded Yi Fei, Bai Yanran, and Mad Dog and stabbed into the ground, forming a circular sword formation. Within the sword formation, there was a white-robed swordsman standing proudly on top of each sword. Bai Yanran and Mad Dog's expressions became more and more unpleasant. Yi Fei also frowned slightly. He turned around helplessly and said, "We didn't mean to barge into Sword Gate. We were framed by the fat steward of the VIP pavilion. He said that the Palace Lord of Sword Palace would receive us here. I didn't expect it to be a scam." "Humph, I don't care if you were tricked or deceived. You have seen the rules of Sword Gate. Those who barge into Sword Gate will die. You barged in without permission. Then you must die." Ma Yuan sneered. He didn't care about Yi Fei at all. Ma Yuan's gaze only cautiously swept over Mad Dog. Soon, it fell on Bai Yanran. "Miss, I can't break the rules of Sword Gate. But if you are willing to be my maidservant, perhaps I can be lenient and let you live." Boom! As he spoke, sword light whistled behind Ma Yuan like a raging wave. It stirred up the countless swords that were stabbed into the ground, making clanging sounds. Ma Yuan didn't give Yi Fei a chance to continue explaining. He also didn't ask whether Bai Yanran was willing to be his maidservant. The whistling sword light was like a torrential flood, rushing towards Mad Dog without asking. How could Mad Dog endure such provocation? With a crazed roar, Mad Dog's fingertips were like sharp swords. They carried the power to rip apart the wind as they clawed forward, tearing the void and shattering the torrent of sword light in the surroundings. That looks like Deathmatch Palace's wind-ripping claw. I've been to the Deathmatch arena before. A Sword Palace disciple in the crowd recognized Mad Dog's divine power. Ma Yuan's expression changed, but then he sneered and said, "So what if it's the Deathmatch Palace? Only core disciples like us and the direct descendants of the Sword Palace can enter the Sword Gate. Any outsider who enters must die. This is the ancestral rule." After one wave of sword light was shattered, another wave of sword light that was even stronger erupted like a torrential flood. This was the divine power of the Sword Palace, the torrential flood sword technique. It was based on the eruption of a torrential flood. At this time, Ma Yuan had pushed this divine power to the limit. In an instant, the entire sky was filled with raging torrent. The sword light shook heaven and earth as it pierced forward and collided with Mad Dog's wind-ripping claw. In just 3 strikes, it had broken through the wind-ripping claw and pierced towards Mad Dog's chest. Kill. Ma Yuan did not show any mercy. Not only did he attack, but he also drew on the power of the sword formation. The mighty sword chi became more and more terrifying as it pierced through Mad Dog's protective divine power and physical defense. The last strike was like a flash of lightning as it pierced towards Mad Dog's throat. Mad Dog roared angrily. He had not used his full strength at the beginning, and had not even released his divine power. But Ma Yuan was relentless. He was determined to kill him. The sword is not bad, but the person is too weak. Just as the sword light was about to pierce Mad Dog's throat, Yi Fei's figure suddenly appeared and blocked in front of Mad Dog. At the same time, a heavy sword light, like a comet, collided with Ma Yuan's torrential flood sword technique. The torrential sword light suddenly seemed to have hit an immovable divine mountain. The sword light stopped and the torrential flood disappeared. Only then did Mad Dog come to his senses. Cold sweat appeared on his forehead. He had failed once, and now he had failed again. In the future, when facing these swordsmen, I have to go all out at all times. You actually managed to block my sword. I made a mistake. It turns out that you are the strongest of the 3. Unfortunately, bringing that little girl back was your biggest mistake. Ma Yuan's face revealed a sinister glint as he mocked in a voice that only the 2 of them could hear. At the same time, he did not intend to continue fighting with Yi Fei. Instead, he suddenly retreated, revealing more than 10 Sword Palace Dao Lords behind him. Kill them all. Any outsider who trespasses in the Sword Gate must die. Ma Yuan ordered coldly. More than 10 beams of intense sword light appeared behind him. It was obvious that he was going to kill them. Yi Fei was completely enraged. He did not speak. He only used his actions to prove his anger. The Taiji sword cauldron whistled out. Just as the Sword Palace Dao Lord surrounded him, it suddenly slashed towards Ma Yuan. Ma Yuan was instantly enraged. Ant, how dare you use your sword in my sword palace? Ma Yuan's retreating body suddenly came to a halt. He no longer charged at the Mad Dog. Instead, he continued to charge at Yi Fei. The fierce sword light suddenly transformed into 2 mighty divine dragons. They raised their heads and opened their mouths, spewing out endless sword light. Yi Fei snorted coldly. He slammed the Taiji sword cauldron forward. The Taiji on the cauldron flashed, blocking the divine dragons. The heavy sword in his hand burned. He slashed out a killing sword light. The world was filled with an endless aura of death. Yi Fei held the sword of death in his hand and continued to attack Ma Yuan. Thunderclap's sword, 10,000 layers of light. Ma Yuan's sword suddenly changed from a divine dragon to a swift thunderclap. It bypassed the Taiji sword cauldron and stabbed towards Yi Fei's chest and back. Back off. As if he did not notice the 2 thunderclap sword lights, Yi Fei strode forward. The black iron heavy sword instantly turned into the sword of death. It broke through the thunderclap sword chi and continued to slash forward. Ma Yuan's expression changed from a sneer to one of horror. He was terrified of Yi Fei's sword Dao. In the city of 10,000 swords, the strongest was the Sword Palace. There were very few outsiders who could defeat the Sword Palace disciples in the Sword Dao. Yi Fei, on the other hand, had not only won, he had completely crushed his opponent. I don't believe that I can't beat you after 30 years of learning the sword. Ma Yuan roared. Suddenly, his sword spirit appeared. His sword spirit was a strange existence that was half dragon and half sword. But like Yi Fei, this sword spirit was still incomplete. After all, even though a sword spirit was also a mystique will, it was much harder to comprehend and master than a mystique will. Correspondingly, when the sword spirit was complete, the amplification of the sword Tao from the sword spirit would be much stronger than a mystique will. At this moment, under the amplification of the half-dragon sword spirit, the sword in Ma Yuan's hand had almost completely turned into a divine dragon. It let out an angry roar like an ancient divine dragon. Chapter 2381. They're all lunatics. Kill. As Ma Yuan's sword was broken, the other Tao lords of the Sword Palace finally stopped watching from the sidelines. Instead, they attacked with their swords. More than 10 sword lights formed a sword light that could topple mountains and overturn seas at the same time, whistling over. When these beams of sword light gathered together, they formed the image of mountains and rivers. With the momentum of heaven and earth, they came crashing down on Yi Fei, Bai Yanran, and Mad Dog. Bai Yanran's expression changed. With a shout, dark force palm winds formed into mountains that appeared in the surroundings. Beside the mountains, rivers appeared. It was a magnificent sight. This was Pan King's martial arts divine ability. Pan King stands on the ground, thousands of mountains revolve. Roar. Another savage roar came from Mad Dog's mouth. Countless claw shadows formed a hurricane that tore through the void. This was Mad Dog's true strength. Under the claw shadows, the nearby treasured swords that were stuck in the ground trembled. The Sword Palace disciples had to use all their strength to suppress them. Many people's expressions changed when they looked at Bai Yanran and Mad Dog. They didn't expect the two of them to have such powerful combat strength. They didn't seem like the ordinary Lord of Heaven and Tao Lords at all. But the fiercest was still Yi Fei. Facing the images of mountains and rivers formed by more than a dozen Tao Lords, his expression didn't change. The light from his dark steel heavy sword soared into the sky. At the same time, in the Sky Palace, the indestructible sword token in Yi Fei's hand suddenly shone with divine light and the aura of a sword soul appeared. Even though Yi Fei's sword soul aura was the same as Ma Yuan's and was only in the embryonic form of a sword soul, Yi Fei's sword soul was the undying sword soul, while Ma Yuan's sword soul was only a half-dragon sword soul. The same embryonic form of the sword soul had a different effect on the improvement of the sword Tao divine ability. Boom! The instant Yi Fei's sword soul embryonic form appeared, the entire dark steel heavy sword turned into a black meteor burning with sword light. Boundless sword light smashed forward, causing the heavens and earth to tremble. Ma Yuan's expression also became one of complete terror. Sword soul? Yi Fei was able to comprehend the sword soul that only the disciples of the Sword Palace could comprehend. This caused him to panic. The thunderclap sword of light he released was unable to block Yi Fei's sword of death's sword of light of death. 2 loud bangs rang out consecutively, as if the heavens and earth had split apart. Ma Yuan's sword beam completely collapsed. Ma Yuan's expression turned extremely sinister at this moment. Yi Fei, your sword is very strong, but you must die. Concentrate all your strength and kill him alone. Kill! Ma Yuan roared. The shattered sword light suddenly turned into a stream of light and fused with the sword light of the dozen Tao Lords. Instantly, the power of the sword light grew stronger and more intense. Yi Fei felt as though he was being swallowed up by the boundless sword light. Then, the sword light formed mountains and rivers. The power of the mountains and rivers seemed to overturn the heavens and earth as they crushed downward. The pressure was like a mountain and the sword light was like an ocean. However, just as the mountains and rivers were about to crush Yi Fei, layers of flames suddenly burst out from Yi Fei's body. These weren't real flames, but the light of despair formed by the battle demon nomological laws, the earth core nomological laws, and the sword cauldron nomological laws at the same time. This was the light of the golden body of despair. When this light appeared on Yi Fei's body, Yi Fei instantly unleashed the boundless might of the battle demon. So what if you have mountains and rivers? My sword can destroy mountains and seas. Phenomenon break. Boom. The heavy sword burned and divine inscriptions appeared. Yi Fei held the heavy sword in his hand and tore apart the heavens and seas. At the same time, Ma Yuan and the dozen Tao lords of the Sword Palace roared furiously. They pushed their sword light to the limit in an attempt to combine forces and kill Yi Fei. However, Yi Fei was too fast. Huge azure dragon wings appeared on his back, causing Yi Fei's speed to suddenly break through his own limits. He didn't wait for the Tao lords to complete the mountain and river phenomenon. Within the mountains and rivers, a huge withered sword light appeared. This was Yi Fei's second origin mystique, the withered sword. This type of sword was not very offensive, but the most important function of the solitary sword was that it could break mystiques. Even though this mystique was a mountain-river phenomenon created by more than 10 Tao lords, the moment it encountered the Sword of Solitude still managed to cut a huge hole in the mountain-river phenomenon formed by the sword light. Yi Fei's body forcefully resisted the pressure of the mountain river sword qi through this hole and charged out. This is impossible. Outside, Ma Yuan's face was filled with horror. He never expected that his joint attack with more than a dozen Tao lords would not only fail to kill Yi Fei, but also allow Yi Fei to use a strange sword light to forcefully create a gap in their mountain and river phenomenon. Then, Ma Yuan saw a hand reach out from the sword light that filled the sky. Ma Yuan instinctively wanted to dodge, but Yi Fei's speed was too fast. The speed of the azure dragon wings was not something Ma Yuan could dodge. He only felt a fiend's celestial hand suddenly reach out and choke him. Then, the hand tightened its grip. He fell to the ground. Then, another godlike foot stomped heavily on his back with the weight of Mount Tai. As a direct descendant of the Sword Palace, he was actually being stepped on by a foreign country bumpkin. This was definitely a humiliation that Ma Yuan had never experienced before. Then, a roar came from the other Tao lords like a raging volcano. Let go of senior brother Ma Yuan, and we'll leave your corpse intact. Are you all threatening me? Yi Fei's cold voice came from within the purple gold light. Then, an even colder sword stabbed out. It was the dark iron heavy sword. The heavy sword smashed into the ground with great force, causing the ground of the sword's gate to shake violently. Following that, Ma Yuan's blood-curdling screams could be heard. When the heavy sword smashed into the ground, it also nailed Ma Yuan's thigh to the ground. If anyone dares to take a step closer, the next sword will definitely not nail their thigh to death. Yi Fei looked indifferently at everyone in the Sword Palace. The Tao lords who were just about to attack all sucked in a cold breath. Lunatic, this is definitely a lunatic. Does he know what kind of status Ma Yuan has in the Sword Palace? Does he know what serious consequences there will be if he stomps Ma Yuan to the ground? Who cares about the consequences? Sword Palace was heartless first. Then, don't blame us for being unjust. Mad Dog sneered and suddenly walked to Ma Yuan's side. He slashed at Ma Yuan's body with his tearing wind claw. In an instant, a tenth of Ma Yuan's bones were shattered. I went easy on you just now, but you tried to kill me with all your strength. Now we're even. Mad Dog stood up. As an expert on the slaughter list, he was definitely not a kind person. The excruciating pain almost caused Ma Yuan to faint. The nearby Sword Palace disciples all sucked in a cold breath. Lunatics, these three are all lunatic. Not only did they trespass into the Sword Palace, they even dared to torture a direct descendant of the Sword Palace. Chapter 2382. What sin was there? Ma Yuan was captured, and Yi Fei and Mad Dog were in a frenzy. Although there were many Sword Palace disciples, none of them dared to attack Yi Fei. they only surrounded him. Some of them had already rushed out of Sword Gate to report to the Sword Palace elders. Yi Fei, the way you treated senior apprentice brother Ma Yuan has already alarmed a divine lord elder. If you don't want to die, you'd best release senior apprentice brother Ma Yuan immediately. Hundreds and thousands of swords pointed towards Yi Fei. These Sword Palace disciples would not hesitate to kill Yi Fei to protect the dignity of the Sword Palace. This made Bai Yanran and Mad Dog tense. After all, this was the Sword Palace, one of the top 10 factions of the Divine Prefecture. Its status was not inferior to that of the Palace of the Divine Kings, the overlord of the City of Divine Kings. However, there seemed to be someone secretly looking for an excuse to kill them. Yi Fei's expression also turned serious. His current strength could suppress a Tao Lord, but not a Divine Lord. Moreover, there was still Renzu above a Divine Lord. Bai Yanran, brother Jifeng, let's go out too, Yi Fei said in a low voice. Sword Gate was obviously an important place of the Sword Palace. Entering without permission was equivalent to suicide. He didn't want the Divine Lords to find an excuse to attack. Only then did he pull out the heavy sword that had impaled Ma Yuan. The intense pain caused Ma Yuan to roar like a beast. The surrounding disciples of the Sword Palace were in an uproar. Some people's sword lights had already begun to whistle. They wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to attack. Even if they couldn't kill Yi Fei, even if they could capture 2 of his companions, they would still have bargaining chips to exchange hostages with Yi Fei. Unfortunately, Bai Yanran and Mad Dog didn't give these people a chance. Almost as soon as Yi Fei pulled his heavy sword out of the ground, Bai Yanran quickly rushed forward and released a divine pattern that he had prepared beforehand, completely sealing Ma Yuan's cultivation. Mad Dog, on the other hand, dragged Ma Yuan by his leg, as if he was dragging a dead pig out of Sword's Gate. Yi Fei's sword was directly placed on Ma Yuan's body. Whoever dares to come near, don't blame my sword for being merciless, Yi Fei said coldly. The 3 of them cooperated well and rushed out of Sword's Gate at the fastest speed possible, returning to the palace outside. Outside the Sword Palace, the fat manager did not leave. Instead, he stared at Yi Fei and company as though he was looking at a monster. Can they still survive after entering the Sword Palace? The one being dragged on the ground is actually young Master Ma Yuan? The plump manager's face turned pale. Yi Fei's eyes flashed with killing intent the moment he saw this person. It was this person who had tricked them into Sword's Gate and put them in danger. I don't care if you deliberately set us up or if someone ordered you to do so. I can't let you go. Yi Fei raised his sword and rushed towards the plump manager. He also wanted to find out who was behind this through this person and set up the trap in secret. Stop! A fierce roar came from the distant sky. The divine lords of the Sword Palace were rushing over very quickly. When they saw that Yi Fei dared to drag a direct descendant of the Sword Palace on the ground, the divine lord who rushed over didn't ask any questions. He raised his hand and a huge sword beam slashed towards Yi Fei. Bai Yanran and Mad Dog's expressions changed at the same time. The disciples of the Sword Palace cheered. Great, it's the Tri-Treasure Divine Lord. Let's see how these 2 lunatics can continue being so arrogant. Ma Yuan's face was filled with surprise and savagery. He roared loudly, You 3 country bumpkins, do you think you can walk out of the Sword Palace alive by capturing me? You will only die faster. Noisy! Yi Fei didn't say anything. He suddenly kicked Ma Yuan with the tip of his foot. A large hand had already grabbed Ma Yuan's throat and lifted him into the air to block the sword beam released by the Divine Lord. The Divine Lord who rushed over was extremely angry, but he had no choice but to quickly disperse the sword beam. Otherwise, when the sword beam reached him, not only would Yi Fei die, Ma Yuan would also die. At the same time, the Divine Lord's body transformed into a sword beam and suddenly disappeared in front of Yi Fei. He appeared behind Yi Fei and released an even stronger sword beam to kill Yi Fei. Yi Fei was completely enraged. Has the Sword Palace fallen to such a state? What a disgrace to the name of the Ninth Heaven Sword Master! Suddenly, Yi Fei threw Ma Yuan to the ground. He shouted to Bai Yanran and Mad Dog, "We will guard this place. If anyone dares to approach this circle, we will attack together and drag Ma Yuan down with us." "Alright." Mad Dog's expression didn't change. His eyes were crazed. "Alright." Bai Yanran also nodded. She stepped on Ma Yuan's body domineeringly, and accidentally stepped on Ma Yuan's bleeding wound. Just now, when Ma Yuan looked at her with an evil look and spoke obscenely to her, Bai Yanran had been suppressing her anger for a long time. The sharp pain also made Ma Yuan scream like a pig being slaughtered. "Elder Sanbao, don't come over. They are all crazy. If you attack, they will really kill me. How dare you?" Sensing the killing intent of Yi Fei and the others, the Tri-Treasure Divine Lord was furious. His sword even shattered the clouds, but he didn't dare to cut down. "This is the Sword Palace. Even if you capture Ma Yuan, once Renzu attacks, he can kill you from a distance. He won't give you a chance to attack. Let Ma Yuan go and you can still live." Since force didn't work, the Tri-Treasure Divine Lord could only use soft tactic. Hearing this, Bai Yanran and Mad Dog's expressions changed. What the Tri-Treasure Divine Lord said was true. Renzu did have the ability to kill them instantly, even if they had a hostage. Yi Fei sneered. "We didn't avoid danger. We risked our lives to escort the bloodline of the Sword Palace back. The Sword Palace not only didn't thank us, but also deliberately deceived us and set us up to enter the Sword Gate. Is this what the Sword Palace said? Is this what a swordsman does? If so, you don't deserve to use swords." Boom! Yi Fei's words were like thunder, rolling out and spreading even further. Yi Fei didn't only want his words to spread to the Sword Palace, but also to the entire city of 10,000 swords. The expressions of the Sword Palace disciples all changed. Ma Yuan and the fat manager suddenly began to tremble uncontrollably. Lastly, the Tri-Treasure Divine Lord was so angry that a terrifying murderous intent appeared. "Shut up! You've misled the public with your lies and tarnished the reputation of the Sword Palace. You deserve death. Ma Sanbao, you're the one who should shut up. If you attack, you'll really tarnish the reputation of the Sword Palace. As a Divine Lord, you're so aggressive toward a junior of the Lord of Heaven. Don't you feel ashamed?" Suddenly, an even stronger Divine Lord aura came from the sky, causing Ma Sanbao's expression to change. "Niu Hao, didn't he go to investigate the Demon Mountain? Why is he back now?" Although he was shocked, Ma Sanbao still shouted, "Niu Hao, mind your own business. These three people not only trespassed into the Sword Gate, but also injured and humiliated Ma Yuan. If we don't kill them, how can the dignity of the Sword Palace exist?" Chapter 2383. Thousand Swords. Grave Sir God Niu Hao's words were sonorous, like the sound of a sword reverberating through the earth. It made the blood of those who heard it boil, and they deeply agreed. Yi Fei also secretly heaved a sigh of relief. They understood that as long as Sir God Niu Hao was around, they would be able to get through this incident safely. "Thank you, Senior Ox, for upholding justice for us." Yi Fei cupped his hands towards the sky and thanked him sincerely. Niu Hao laughed and suddenly descended from the sky to Yi Fei's side. He patted Yi Fei's shoulder and said, "You are my lord's benefactors, which means you are Niu Hao's benefactors. There is no need to thank me. However, Ma Yuan is in the wrong. In the end, he is a direct descendant of the Sword Palace. You can injure him, but if you accidentally kill him, then it will be troublesome." His attitude was very sincere. Every forefather of man had many powerful followers. Without a doubt, Niu Hao was a follower of the forefather of man who protected the sword. "I wonder whose follower this Tri-Treasure Celestial Lord is?" Yi Fei thought to himself. Bai Yanran and Mad Dog also took a step back. Since the Divine Lord had appeared, the situation could not be too tense. Ma Yuan, on the other hand, was heavily injured and had many of his bones broken by Mad Dog. Even though Yi Fei and the other two had retreated, Ma Yuan was still unable to stand up. He could only continue to lie on the ground like a dead dog, attracting many strange gazes. This made Ma Yuan, who usually considered himself a genius, so angry that he vomited blood on the spot. He felt as if his heart was being stabbed by a knife as he roared, "Tri-treasure Divine Lord, they deserve to die for humiliating me like this even if they have done something. Kill." The Tri-treasure's immortal lord suddenly roared. Yi Fei's threat had infuriated him. Even though Niu Hao had stepped in, he still had no intention of letting Yi Fei and company off. The anger of an immortal lord must be appeased with blood. "How dare you? Then I, old Niu, will let you quell your anger. Ma Sanbao, kneel down." Sir Immortal Niu Hao roared. The Tri-treasure Celestial Lord's attack came to an abrupt halt. At the same time, he looked unwillingly at the token in Niu Hao's hand. Yi Fei recognized it at a glance. It was the Renzu token he had brought back. However, the divine inscriptions on it were slightly different. "This is the Order of the Sword Protector Renzu. Seeing this order is like seeing Renzu. If you don't kneel, are you trying to rebel?" Niu Hao shouted again. All the disciples of the Sword Palace present knelt down in front of Niu Hao. The Tao Lords who had attacked Yi Fei were all trembling in fear. Ma Yuan was so frightened that he didn't dare to say anything else. Dong. The Tri-treasure Celestial Lord was trembling with anger. He knelt down on one knee helplessly and glared at Niu Hao. Then, he glanced coldly at Yi Fei. "Consider yourselves lucky. However, in the Sword Palace, it's better to keep your eyes open. Who can be provoked and who can be fawned over? You have to watch carefully, step by step." The Tri-treasure Celestial Lord didn't attack after bowing. Instead, he turned around angrily and was about to leave. Niu Hao also stopped when he saw this. He said to Yi Fei, "Today's matter is the fault of the Sword Palace. I guarantee that you will be compensated. Ma Yuan is a direct descendant of the Sword Palace. If something happens to him, it won't be good for anyone. Yi Fei, how about you let Ma Yuan go first?" Yi Fei nodded but didn't withdraw his sword. Instead, he pointed at Ma Yuan and said, "Ma Yuan is injured. I can't kill him. But I was framed and almost died in the Sword Gate. Do you think I can let it go with just one sentence? Then what do you want? Remember, this is the Sword Palace. It's not the grassland you're familiar with." Suddenly, the Tri-treasure Celestial Lord turned around again. He still had a sword light in his hand. When he saw that Yi Fei still wanted to pursue the matter, the sword light in his hand finally left his hand. However, this sword light didn't slash at Yi Fei, but at the fat steward. With a poof, the fat steward's eyes widened. His head rolled on the ground. Even in death, the fat steward couldn't believe that he had died before he even had a chance to speak. "You said that someone framed you. Where's the evidence? Show it to me." The Tri-treasure Celestial Lord's expression was indifferent. It was as if he had just killed a chicken or duck. The nearby Sword Palace disciples were so frightened that they fell silent. The Tao Lords who had attacked Yi Fei were so frightened that they trembled. They were afraid that the Tri-treasure Celestial Lord would also silence him. Fortunately, those who could enter the Sword Gate were all elite disciples of the Sword Palace. The Tri-treasure Celestial Lord wouldn't go too far. He only gave Yi Fei a sidelong glance with a mocking expression before turning around and leaving quickly. "Yi Fei, don't take it to heart. As compensation, I'll personally escort you into the Sword Gate. Let's see who dares to stop us. As for Ma Yuan, he's just a piece of shit. Just let him go," Niu Hao advised. Yi Fei sheathed his sword and let Ma Yuan go thoughtfully. Ma Yuan was so ashamed that he wanted to die. As a direct descendant of the Sword Palace, he had always been high and mighty. He treated others like dirt and people like Yi Fei were lowly commoners. But now, he had been trampled under the feet of a lowly commoner who had never taken him seriously and beaten like a dead dog. Niu Hao even treated him like a piece of shit. Ma Yuan was so angry that he couldn't catch his breath and fainted. Yi Fei shook his head inwardly. Ma Yuan was talented in the sword Dao, but his temperament was still too shallow. This time, with Niu Hao leading the way, Yi Fei no longer had any doubts. He happily followed Niu Hao and entered the sword gate again. The sword gate was empty. In the distance, there were mountain peaks that formed sword mountains of various shapes and sizes. Niu Hao pointed at the sword mountains and said, "Do you see those mountain peaks? That's the most mysterious myriad sword tomb of our sword palace. As long as you enter the myriad sword tomb, you will be able to sense the complete sword soul. Therefore, in the entire heaven realm, any martial artist who uses the sword greatly admires the myriad sword tomb of our sword palace. They hate that they can't enter it to cultivate." Niu Hao explained proudly as he led the way. Yi Fei didn't say anything. He seemed to be deep in thought. Mad Dog said with a face full of surprise, "This is the myriad sword tomb that the headmaster mentioned before. It is said that there is a high chance that one can awaken a martial path divine ability in the sword tomb." "That's right. This is the function of the myriad sword tomb. However, outsiders are generally not allowed to enter the myriad sword tomb. If you want to enter, you have to go through a very strict test. Only by being recognized by the myriad sword tomb can you enter the sword tomb to cultivate. Moreover, the higher the level of recognition, the greater the range of activities you can move about in the sword tomb," Niu Hao said. Yi Fei nodded secretly when he heard this. As he ended his contemplation, he couldn't help but develop a strong interest in the sword tomb. After all, in the earth realm, he already had the embryonic form of a sword soul. He even fused it with the undying sword soul. It was just that in the earth realm, he still didn't know how to condense a complete sword soul. And in the sword palace, he obviously found a way to improve. Chapter 2384. The Battle of Swordsmanship. Niu Hao said, "Miss Ro's condition is very good. She has awakened the 9th grade bloodline. If nothing unexpected happens, she will at least be a divine lord in the future. As for why someone would frame you, this is indeed related to the Battle of Swordsmanship in our sword palace." "Senior Niu, what exactly is this Battle of Swordsmanship?" Yi Fei could not help but ask. He hoped to find traces of the 9th heaven sword master from Niu Hao. Niu Hao did not hide the truth. He sighed and said, "You may not know this, but ever since the previous palace master disappeared a few hundred years ago, our sword palace appeared to be very powerful on the surface. However, internally, we have gradually split into 3 factions, which are the current Inner Sword Palace and Outer Sword Palace. The Inner Sword Palace, which is Ma Sanbao's side, is led by the family forces. Because the original Sword Palace was founded by these families, the family forces in the Sword Palace are very powerful, and there are also many strong talents. After the disappearance of the previous palace master, they gradually suppressed our Inner Sword Palace and became the strongest force in the Sword Palace." Niu Hao suddenly lowered his voice, and said in a tone that only Yi Fei and the other 2 could hear, "I even suspect that the attack on Miss Ro on Demon Mountain was secretly ordered by someone in the Outer Sword Palace to capture Miss Ro and attack our Inner Sword Palace. So I deliberately spread the news that I would go to Demon Mountain to investigate this matter, hoping to lure the snake out of its hole and capture the Outer Sword Palace. Unfortunately, the people in the Sword Palace were too cunning, and they did not fall for it. Instead, they wanted to take advantage of the time when I was not around and Renzu was recuperating in seclusion to attack you first." After hearing Niu Hao's words, Yi Fei realized that they had unintentionally gotten involved in the power struggle in the Sword Palace. He brought Jiang Xiaorou back and angered the Outer Sword Palace, which was why they barged into the Sword Gate. However, there was one thing that Yi Fei did not understand. We are all part of the Sword Palace. If we cooperate, we both benefit. If we fight, we both lose. Why should the Inner Sword Palace and the Outer Sword Palace compete? Yi Fei asked again. Niu Hao praised, well said, why should the Inner Sword Palace and the Sword Palace compete? In the end, it's because we have different ideals. Many families in the Outer Sword Palace contributed greatly when establishing the Sword Palace. Therefore, they have always advocated that the Sword Palace recruit disciples from those large families to ensure the nobility of the bloodline of the direct descendants of the Sword Palace. Most of the divine lords in the Inner Sword Palace come from small families and are born in the wilderness. Therefore, we advocate that while acknowledging the excellence of the children of the large families, we should not ignore the geniuses who rose step by step from the wilderness. However, this philosophy did not gain the approval of the Outer Sword Palace. Gradually, the Sword Palace began to have conflicts over the Sword Dao. There were factions. At this point, Niu Hao's expression was filled with helplessness. It was a kind of worry for the future of the Sword Palace. Yi Fei and Mad Dog could not persuade this worry. After all, they were not from the Sword Palace. Bai Yanran was puzzled. Besides the Inner Sword Palace and the Inner Sword Palace, isn't there a third faction? What is this faction's philosophy? Good question. In the Sword Palace, other than the Inner Sword Palace and the Inner Sword Palace, there is also the Sword Gate, which is the Sword Gate that you belong to. Originally, the Sword Gate was the place where the seniors of the Sword Palace cultivated and broke through to the Divine Lord level. However, as the conflicts between the Inner and Outer Sword Palace became more and more intense, many seniors who did not want to be involved in the conflict entered the Sword Gate. They built many small sects in the Sword Palace. These sects, when combined, became the Sword Gate of today. The Sword Gate's philosophy is also very unique. They do not care about one's background. As long as you have talent in the Sword Dao and can pass their test, they will guide you wholeheartedly and help you condense a sword soul. Therefore, whether it is the Inner Sword Palace or the Outer Sword Palace, we will send our outstanding disciples here to learn and gain experience. As long as you cultivate seriously here, you will definitely have the opportunity to condense a sword soul that belongs to you alone. Niu Hao's gaze was full of encouragement. However, this kind of encouragement made Bai Yanran and Mad Dog depressed, except for Yi Fei. Senior, we are not people who use the sword. Mad Dog was skilled in torturing and tearing, while Bai Yanran was skilled in defense and divine glyph. However, neither of them were skilled in the Sword Dao. Hearing this, Niu Hao laughed and continued to encourage them. You don't need to worry. The Sword Gate is not limited to just the Sword Dao. There are many experts who are skilled in other martial arts. They do not care about worldly affairs and only focus on breaking through to the Divine Lord level. If you are lucky enough to receive their guidance, you will naturally be able to comprehend other martial arts. It will not be difficult for you to break through to the Dao Lord level. Bai Yanran and Mad Dog were delighted. Yi Fei was also slightly excited. Not only could the Sword Gate help one condense a divine soul, it could also help one break through to the Dao Lord level. It was no wonder that the Sword Palace valued the Sword Gate so much. Of course, there was one more thing that Yi Fei did not know. It was precisely because the Sword Gate had gathered a large number of half-step divine lords near the city of 10,000 swords that its strength was so great that it had become the third most powerful force in the Sword Palace. Both the Sword Palace and the Sword Palace coveted and feared this force. After all, if either side managed to rope in this force, they could immediately change the overall situation of the Sword Palace. In order to balance things out, The Sword Palace and the Sword Palace had set a rule that anyone who entered the Sword Gate without the permission of either side would be executed. Moreover, the number of people sent by the Sword Palace and the Sword Palace to the Sword Gate examination had to be equal. As Yi Fei had saved Jiang Xiao, the Sword Guardian Renzu took advantage of this opportunity to add 3 more people to the Sword Palace. The first was to rope them in, and the second was to express his gratitude. The Sword Palace outside was already unhappy with Yi Fei for saving Jiang Xiao. Now that the Sword Palace had added 3 more people to the Sword Palace, they were furious. Out of anger, the fat manager targeted Yi Fei, tricking Yi Fei into entering the Sword's Gate in order to take advantage of the situation to frame him. However, entering the Sword Gate was easy, but cultivating in the Sword Gate was not easy. The Sword Palace had set a condition for its disciples to cultivate in the Sword Gate for 3 months. After 3 months, regardless of whether or not they had condensed a sword soul, they had to leave and never set foot in the Sword Gate again. Thus, there was only one way to stay in the Sword Gate and cultivate for a long time, and that was to participate in the Sword Gate examination. Only by passing the examination would one be allowed to stay in the Sword Gate and cultivate for another 3 years. This was why the Sword Gate examination was so fierce. Not only did the disciples of the Sword Palace fight for it with all their might, but the clans and sects of the City of 10,000 Swords, and even the kingdoms that had submitted to the Sword Palace, would do everything in their power to send their best disciples to the Sword Gate in an attempt to pass the examination. After all, the Sword Gate offered not only the opportunity to condense a sword soul, but also the opportunity to receive guidance from the half-step Divine Lords who were cultivating in seclusion, allowing them to break through to the Tao Lord realm. Chapter 2385. Jian Sanqing. Some of these youths came from the Sword Dao clans of the City of 10,000 Swords, some came from the large and small countries that had submitted to the Sword Palace, and some came from all over the Divine Prefecture or even other prefectures. These people didn't seek to condense a sword soul, but to break through to the Tao Lord realm. So many martial artists have come to the Sword sect. Won't we have to wait for a long time if we have to line up to participate in the test? Mad Dog frowned. He was an impatient person and couldn't stay idle. Divine Lord Niu Hao pointed at the crowd and said, "There's no need to line up. If you need to take the test, you can directly enter. Those who are here are all adjusting their condition and hoping to obtain a better ranking. Remember, in the Sword Sect test, the higher you break through, the more attention you will receive from the half-step Divine Lord. You might even be able to obtain their true teachings." In the Sword Sect, breaking through to the Tao Lord realm wasn't as simple as that. There were far too many half-step Divine Lords who stood aloof from worldly affairs and focused solely on cultivation. Breaking through to the Divine Lord realm was an extremely risky endeavor. If they failed, they would die and all their efforts would be for naught. This was also the reason why the half-step Divine Lords of the Sword Sect were so willing to guide the juniors. They all wanted to pass down everything they had learned before breaking through to the Divine Lord realm. Only then would they be able to focus on breaking through. The 108 Mountains of the Sword Sect. There are a total of 108 half-step Divine Lords cultivating here. The higher your ranking in the test, the more times you will be able to visit the mountains. Thus, no matter what, you must strive to pass through as many stages as possible. Divine Lord Niu Hao solemnly reminded. Yi Fei also nodded seriously. Then, he asked curiously, "Senior Niu, what is visiting a mountain? Is it taking one of those half-step Divine Lords as a teacher?" If that was the case, he really was a bit conflicted. After all, he had already taken the Demon Sovereign as his teacher in the Earth realm. Even though the Demon Sovereign's whereabouts were unknown after entering the Heaven realm, without the Demon Sovereign's approval, Yi Fei didn't want to casually have another teacher. Moreover, with his current strength, he was only a half-step Divine Lord. To be his teacher was still a bit too weak. Niu Hao had already attracted a lot of attention when he personally brought people in. At this moment, they heard that Yi Fei was actually a newbie who didn't even know the rules of the mountain. Many of the young geniuses couldn't help but chuckle, instantly turning Yi Fei into a commoner. Commoners, in the city of 10,000 swords, where the major clans were in charge, and where status and bloodline were important, were undoubtedly the most despised people. As soon as he saw Niu Hao, a powerful sword palace celestial emperor walked out from the center of the crowd and said with a mocking smile, "Niu Hao, it seems like the disciples on your side are nothing special. Before you came, only half of your 500 disciples barely passed the Sword's Gate examination. But on my side 2/3 of them passed. I've said it before, the Sword Palace should be pure. I don't want any cats or dogs. Just take them in when you see them. The Sword Palace is the holy land of martial arts. Only geniuses can enter." This celestial emperor didn't hide his contempt for Yi Fei and the others. This wasn't directed at Yi Fei, but purely because he didn't think highly of the commoners. Yi Fei wasn't angered. He only carefully sized up this celestial emperor. Then, he finally discovered the difference between the inner and outer Sword Palace. The symbol of the inner Sword Palace. It was a straight and sharp divine sword that pierced through the clouds, as if it wanted to shatter the heavens. The symbol of the outer Sword Palace was also a divine sword. But the blade was pointed downwards, as if it wanted to stand above all life. But the symbol of the Sword's Gate was two divine swords. There were no people of the Sword's Gate around, so Yi Fei couldn't tell. But just from the difference in the symbols, he could tell that the inner and outer Sword Palace had different sword Tao philosophies. Niu Hao snorted. He wasn't a man of many words. The failure of the outer Sword Palace test left him speechless. Yi Fei smiled and chimed in, "Senior, I beg to differ. As the saying goes, quality is more important than quantity. 100 sheep can't compare to a ferocious tiger." Niu Hao suddenly came to a realization. He raised his eyebrows and said loudly, "Ma Bi, our inner Sword Palace takes the path of shrewdness. We're not like your outer Sword Palace, who takes the path of miscellaneous soldiers. You can easily achieve some results and you'll be like a turtle." Yi Fei's face suddenly darkened. He realized that Niu Hao was actually quite sarcastic. Hearing this, Celestial Emperor Ma Bi's face turned ashen. He wasn't Ma Bi, but maybe he was the leader of the Outer Sword Palace. He was also the one who brought the elites of the Outer Sword Palace to cultivate in Sword's Gate. Maybe knew that Niu Hao wasn't good with words. Thus, he purposely taunted Niu Hao when they met. He also took the opportunity to humiliate the Inner Sword Palace in front of the other young geniuses. But who knew that after Yi Fei's reminder, Niu Hao was humiliated instead? Maybe couldn't vent his anger on Niu Hao. He stared coldly at Yi Fei and said, "You're Yi Fei? I heard that you're a survivor of the Heavenly Palace of Despair. What qualifications do you have to enter our Sword Palace? Could it be that the Inner Sword Palace has already colluded with the Heavenly Palace of Despair to trap us in the Sword Palace?" Maybe's words had a hidden meaning. The Outer Sword Palace disciples behind him started to clamor. The Heavenly Palace of Despair was destroyed under the order of the Celestial Dynasty. If there are any survivors that sneak into the Sword Palace, who will bear the responsibility if the Celestial Dynasty pursues the matter? Niu Hao was also shocked. He said, "Yi Fei, you're from the Heavenly Palace of Despair? How is that possible?" Yi Fei felt wronged. But in his heart, he was impressed by Pan Wang's foresight. If it wasn't for Pan Wang's arrangements that allowed him to clear his name, he would have been lucky if he wasn't chased out of the Sword Palace, let alone entering Sword's Gate. "I'm not a survivor of the Heavenly Palace of Despair. It's just a coincidence that I learned the martial arts of the Heavenly Palace of Despair. This is something that the Yin Yang Palace, Death Arena Palace, Lord Pan Palace, and even the deity King Palace have all acknowledged when I was in the city of deities. I can prove this. I, Lord Pan Palace, am willing to vouch that Yi Fei isn't a survivor of the heavenly palace of despair. Bai Yanran stood out and said. A token appeared in his hand. It was the token of Lord Pan Palace. I, the Death Arena, can also represent Death Arena Palace to prove Yi Fei's innocence. Mad Dog also took out a token. It was the token of Death Arena Palace. As soon as these two tokens appeared, they immediately strongly proved Yi Fei's identity. Niu Hao's expression relaxed. Maybe was also speechless. He was really unhappy. Teacher, even if this person isn't a survivor of the heavenly palace of despair, these three people, one from Lord Pan Palace, one from Death Arena Palace, and the last one has an unknown background. They aren't subordinates of the Sword Palace. They don't have the right to cultivate in Sword's Gate. Seeing that Maybe couldn't refute, a graceful and elegant young man walked out from behind Maybe. His every move was filled with majestic sword chi. It's the Crown Prince of Sword Kingdom, Jian Sanxing. Jian Sanxing is the strongest swordsman in Sword Kingdom. Among the Lord of Heaven in the Outer Sword Palace, Jian Sanxing's strength is ranked in the top 10. A disciple of the Inner Sword Palace whispered. Chapter 2386. Very perverted. Sanxing, you can't say that. Although the three of them are not qualified, they still saved the daughter of my Sword Palace's Rinzhu. I believe their strength is worth a look. Niu Hao, how about this? Why don't we let them compete with my disciple? I would like to see how strong they are to be able to save someone from Demon Mountain. Maybe Shinjuan's eyes flashed dangerously. Jian Sanxing knew that Yi Fei's reminder to Niu Hao must have angered his master. Without waiting for Niu Hao to speak, he stood up and provoked, Yi Fei, I heard that you defeated Ma Yuan with your sword outside. Your sword Dao must be extraordinary. Do you dare to bet with me? Don't bet with him. He is Maybe's proudest disciple. His sword Dao is more than twice as powerful as Ma Yuan's. Niu Hao's expression was solemn. Although the Sword Palace was closer to commoner martial artists, he had to admit that there was a huge gap between commoner martial artists and those aristocratic martial artists from large family clans. Moreover, Jian Sanxing was not only talented in Sword Dao, but also had the guidance of a monarch god. He was not someone that a rogue martial artist like Yi Fei could compare to. If he lost, it would be a blow to the Sword Palace. Yi Fei was very depressed. The feeling of being looked down upon was very unpleasant. Moreover, he had been honest since he entered the Sword Palace. He had never caused any trouble. But now, the Sword Palace had repeatedly set him up and provoked him. Yi Fei was already angry. Jian Sanxing's provocation was exactly what he wanted. Even if I don't have the ability to go against the Sword Palace, I will still defeat Jian Sanxing and give the Sword Palace a slap in the face. Yi Fei suddenly had a strong conviction. It was his strong confidence in his sword Dao. Alright, how do you want to bet? It's simple. Let's compete in speed and number of stages. Whoever clears the most stages and moves the fastest will be the winner. Jian Sanxing coldly pointed at a sword pagoda not far away. This was the place where Swords Gates tests were conducted. This sword pagoda had a total of 108 levels, and each level represented a test. Before coming here, Niu Hao had told him that every level of the sword pagoda had a heavenly monarch realm divine ability seal left behind by a half-step divine lord. The higher one went, the more divine ability seals there would be. The highest level had 108 seals, which was equivalent to 108 Lord of Heaven attacking at the same time. That level of power would definitely be incomparably terrifying. Unless one was a true genius, one would not be able to enter. And Jian Sanxing was such a genius. He looked coldly at Yi Fei, not bothering to hide his contempt for Yi Fei. He exuded the aura of royalty and said, This commoner, do you dare to accept this challenge? If you want to fight, I'll fight. This was Yi Fei's attitude. Jian Sanqing showed obvious disgust and disdain towards this attitude. He walked towards the sword pagoda with incomparable arrogance and said, "What this crown prince hates the most are lowly commoners like you. You obviously don't have any ability, but your temper is very big. If you have a little bit of ability, you will be even more unruly and arrogant. But you don't know that in this crown prince's eyes, your little ability is simply a joke." Yi Fei was enraged. He suddenly strode forward and caught up with Jian Sanqing. He said, "We are commoners, but we are not lowly. Every step we take, we cut through thorns and step over countless corpses. We have pride, but we will not be arrogant. Remember, no one is born noble, and no one is born lowly. You think I'm a joke, but in my eyes you are also a joke." Boom! Suddenly, a majestic imperial sword light illuminated the surroundings. Jian Sanqing had used his body as a sword to shatter the void and rush toward the sword pagoda. His eyes were filled with disdain as he said, "You're just a lowly commoner. How laughable! Crown Prince, you think you're so great? It's not like I haven't killed anyone before." Yi Fei stepped out of the shattered void. He was even faster than Jian Sanqing. He used the azure dragon wings and rushed out first. Jian Sanqing was not angry. He even had a cold smile on his face. Lowly commoners will always be lowly commoners. You don't even know how you lost. In the distance, maybe also sneered. No one knew that not long ago, he had secretly copied all the Abhijna seals in the Sword Pagoda and told some of the Outer Sword Palace disciples who were participating in the assessment. As his proudest disciple, Jian Sanqing knew all the Abhijna of the 108 levels in the Sword Pagoda. In this way, the Outer Sword Palace disciples would definitely have a huge advantage. This was also the reason why 2/3 of the Outer Sword Palace disciples would pass the assessment. Maybe coveted Jian Sanqing's greatest hope. Unfortunately, the Inner Sword Palace was completely unaware of this. Looking at Yi Fei rushing into the Sword Pagoda, Sir Immortal Niu Hao could not help but look worried. After all, Yi Fei was brought here by the Inner Sword Palace. If he lost, not only would Yi Fei lose face, but the prestige of the Inner Sword Palace would also be damaged. Yi Fei is still too young and impulsive. In the end, Niu Hao could only stomp his feet and pray, "Sword Ancestor, please protect Yi Fei. I hope he won't lose too badly." Bai Yanran and Mad Dog had strange looks on their faces. Yi Fei won't lose too badly? If that happened, that guy wouldn't have caused so much trouble in the city of Divine Kings. Senior Niu, don't worry. Yi Fei is actually a freak. Bai Yanran hesitated for a long time, but in the end, he still decided to use the word freak to describe Yi Fei. Fortunately, Yi Fei did not hear this. Otherwise, he would definitely be depressed. He admitted that he was very strong, but he was definitely not a freak. Jian Sanqing seems to be a little too confident outside, as if he was certain that I would lose. I have to be careful. Xiao Qiao, hurry up and open your divine eye of heaven and earth. Help me find Jian Sanqing's whereabouts. The Sword Pagoda was very big and was an independent space. Yi Fei could not know Jian Sanqing's situation. Similarly, Jian Sanqing could not know Yi Fei's situation. Fortunately, Yi Fei had Xiao Qiao by his side. Hearing Yi Fei's words, the butterfly vertical eye on Xiao Qiao's forehead immediately opened. He rode the dragon turtle and ran around while chewing on the tonghulu, looking around the space of the Sword Pagoda. The restrictions of the Sword Pagoda could not stop the divine eye of heaven and earth. Soon, Xiao Qiao found Jian Sanqing in another space. At this time, Jian Sanqing was rampaging in the Sword Pagoda. He did not even look at the divine ability seals in the levels. It was as if he could go around them with his eyes closed. Haha, the road map that Master gave me is indeed effective. Following this road map, I can avoid a large amount of divine ability seals and save my profound energy to pass through more stages. I might even become the fourth sword way genius to successfully pass through the 108 stages. Chapter 2387. Passing 100 levels in a row. Look, Jian Sanqing is passing the levels so quickly. In the blink of an eye, he's passed 10 levels in a row. Outside the Sword Pagoda, many young geniuses were exclaiming. The disciples of the Outer Sword Palace were cheering even louder. The disciples of the Inner Sword Palace were all crestfallen. In the past few months of tests, the Inner Sword Palace was obviously weaker than the Outer Sword Palace. In addition, most of the disciples of the Inner Sword Palace were of common birth or came from small family clans. Compared to the disciples of the Outer Sword Palace, they were naturally at a disadvantage. It was inevitable that they felt inferior. If Yi Fei and Jian Sanqing lost the bet this time, it would be a blow to the morale of the Inner Sword Palace. Niu Hao wasn't good with words, but he wasn't stupid. He immediately grumbled, "You said Yi Fei was crazy, but in the end you guys are too narrow-minded. You don't know how strong Jian Sanqing is. Now we can only hope that Yi Fei can pass a few more levels and not lose too badly." Niu Hao sighed deeply. It was obvious that he wasn't optimistic about Yi Fei's chances. Bai Yanran wasn't convinced, but Yi Fei was lagging behind. This was a fact, and she didn't know how to refute it. Yi Fei will definitely win. Otherwise, Field Master won't let me follow him. Mad Dog, on the other hand, was unperturbed and confident in Yi Fei. However, this confidence was reflected in Jian Sanqing's astonishing speed. He broke through the first 24 levels while Yi Fei was still stuck at the 12th level. Mad Dog's expression became doubtful. He wasn't doubting Yi Fei's combat strength, but he was doubting Jian Sanqing's speed. Was it really that exaggerated? However, this kind of speed was definitely what Maybe wanted the most. After all, the faster Jian Sanqing broke through, the more it proved that the concept of the Outer Sword Palace was correct. With such a disciple, what more could I ask for? Of course, defeating a small fry like that doesn't count as skill. Sanqing's goal is to completely pass the 108 stages. Ma Bi's words shook the entire area. He had a very high opinion of this disciple of his. Niu Hao's expression became more and more unpleasant. Swords Gate had a total of 108 stages. The first 24 stages were considered passable, 36 stages were considered average, and 72 stages were considered superior. The 108 stages would be the champion. In the entire history of the Sword Palace, there were only 3 people who were able to become the champion. In the end, all 3 of them had astonishing achievements. If Jian Sanqing became the 4th person, it would be a serious blow to the Sword Palace. Niu Hao regretted not stopping Yi Fei and Jian Sanqing from fighting. Maybe, on the other hand, was immensely proud and arrogant. Jian Sanqing had already passed the 24th level. It had only been half an hour since he had entered the Sword Pagoda. He had broken the record for the fastest breakthrough in the history of the Sword Palace. Outside the Sword Pagoda, the cheers were as loud as mountains. Inside the Sword Pagoda, Jian Sanqing's face was filled with pride. Based on the time, this commoner should still be below the 10th stage. This is also the weakness of a commoner. If he is slightly angered, he will easily become hot-headed. He didn't even think about how strong he was before he dared to make a bet with me. Jian Sanqing placed his hands behind his back and stepped into the 25th stage. Boom! At the 17th stage, Yi Fei drew his sword and shattered the divine ability that had erupted. Then, he wiped his sweat and asked subconsciously, "Xiao Qiao, what stage is Jian Sanqing at?" Squeak squeak. Xiao Qiao thought for a bit and suddenly took out a black wooden tablet from the dragon turtle's body. She saw that it was densely covered with the character Zheng. Below Yi Fei's name, the character Zheng was written so much that it couldn't fit. The dragon turtle was so frightened that it broke out in cold sweat. It quickly swallowed the black wooden token and took out a small wooden token to translate Xiao Chao's words. Yi Fei pretended not to see it. He was secretly shocked that Jian Sanxing could pass the stages so quickly. He couldn't help but feel puzzled. Could it be that my intuition is wrong? Outside, Jian Sanxing's sword light is not as fast as mine. But inside the sword pagoda, his speed is actually faster than mine. Could it be that he deliberately hid his strength to trick me? If that was the case, not only would he not be able to vent his anger, but he would also lose the bet. At this thought, Yi Fei's face darkened. Xiao Chao patted his chest proudly. He felt that this was his chance to show off. Although he didn't understand why Jian Sanxing ran so quickly, Xiao Chao remembered the route that Jian Sanxing ran when he passed. Just as Yi Fei entered the 18th stage, Xiao Chao suddenly pointed in a certain direction. Over there. Yi Fei subconsciously followed Xiao Chao's instructions and took a step forward. But this time, he didn't touch any restrictions. Then, Xiao Chao pointed in another direction. Yi Fei walked over again and still didn't touch any restrictions. In the end, he didn't activate any divine ability or consume any dark force. He easily entered the 19th stage. Yi Fei suddenly realized something. Xiao Chao, are you trying to tell me that Jian Sanxing could pass the stages so quickly by avoiding the divine ability restrictions? Yi. Xiao Chao was very happy. Yi Fei finally understood what she meant. His little hands directed even more energetically. The dragon turtle secretly spat out the black wooden tablet while Yi Fei and Xiao Chao weren't paying attention. It secretly hid it in the most secret place in the turtle shell, so that Xiao Chao wouldn't suddenly find it again. With Xiao Chao's guidance, Yi Fei also experienced the great benefits of avoiding the divine ability restrictions. This way, not only could he pass through the stages effortlessly, but more importantly, he wouldn't consume any dark force. This also increased his success rate in passing the more difficult stages. No wonder 2/3 of the disciples in the Outer Sword Palace passed the test. They were secretly cheating. If it wasn't for Xiao Chao's divine eye of heaven and earth, I wouldn't even know how I lost. Yi Fei's face was full of displeasure. If it was a normal battle, he would admit defeat. But if Jian Sanxing won by cheating, how could Yi Fei swallow this anger? You forced me to do this in the Outer Sword Palace. Xiao Chao, let's speed up. Yi Fei was angry, so he simply increased his walking speed. In any case, Jian Sanxing was continuously passing through the stages. Xiao Chao only needed to remember the route Jian Sanxing took. Yi Fei could pass through this stage even faster. On top of the sword pagoda, there were 2 rays of light constantly moving. Every time they passed through a level, the corresponding level of the sword pagoda would emit a layer of sword light. Originally, Jian Sanxing's ray of light was constantly moving. But now, many people realized that the ray of light that was left far behind was suddenly chasing after Jian Sanxing's ray of light like a rocket. 20th level, 30th level, 40th level, 50th level. The 2 rays of light were getting closer and closer. The number of light that passed through the pagoda also became more and more terrifying. In the end, under the shocked gazes of Maybe and Niu Hao, the 2 rays of light from the sword pagoda actually stopped at the 100th level of the sword pagoda at the same time. Yi Fei and Jian Sanxing actually passed through the 100th level of the sword pagoda at the same time? Niu Hao rubbed his eyes hard. He almost suspected that he was dreaming. Chapter 2388. The battle for the championate had to be known that in order for Jian Sanxing to successfully pass the level and become the 4th champion in the history of the Sword Palace, he had thoroughly researched all the restrictions on the first 100 levels and leaked them to Jian Sanxing. In the end, not only did Jian Sanxing not gain any advantage, He was even caught up by Yi Fei at the final critical moment. This made maybe wonder if Niu Hao had secretly cheated like him. Master, what's going on? Why do I feel like that Yi Fei's passing speed is even faster than senior brother 3 lives? Will senior brother be alright? Ma Bi was surrounded by many disciples. Among them was a woman who was particularly beautiful. Senior brother, what's going on? She was a direct descendant of the Sword Palace, Ma Feng. She was also a couple with Jian Sanxing. Seeing that Jian Sanxing had been caught, Ma Feng was very anxious. Maybe was bewildered, but on the surface, he was calm and composed. He sneered, he's just a country bumpkin. Even if he was lucky and used some underhanded methods to catch up, he's destined to suffer a big setback in the next 8 levels. This was because the restrictions on the last 8 levels were not fixed and could change at any time. Ordinary cheating methods were useless. They could only rely on their own strength to force their way through. Maybe also believed that in terms of pure strength, Jian Sanxing, whom he had trained with all his might, would not disappoint him. However, he had overlooked one point. Jian Sanxing, who had been so used to cheating, did not choose to force his way through the levels when he suddenly realized that he could not cheat. Instead, he was at a loss and did not know what to do. He actually stopped where he was. When Jian Sanxing stopped, Yi Fei, who had been following behind him, also had to stop. He said with a dissatisfied expression, "Xiao Chao, why is Jian Sanxing stopping?" Xiao Chao bit his finger, indicating that Xiao Chao was also puzzled. Yi Fei could not help but feel suspicious. Jian Sanxing has been unstoppable all this time. Now that he suddenly stopped, could it be that he can only cheat on the first 100 levels? He can't cheat on the last 8 levels? No matter what, this is a good opportunity to overtake him. After all, if he kept following behind Jian Sanxing, he would only fall behind. Now that Jian Sanxing had stopped, Yi Fei saw an opportunity. Yi Fei immediately decided not to wait for Jian Sanxing to make a choice. He strode into the 101st level. Boom! As soon as Yi Fei entered the 101st level, 101 early-stage phantoms of the Lord of Heaven appeared and blasted their supernatural powers at him. Yi Fei's expression changed. He suddenly understood why Jian Sanxing was hesitating. Obviously, the creator of this sword pagoda must have considered the possibility of cheating in a fixed pattern. Therefore, he made some changes to the supernatural powers on the last few levels, so that the supernatural powers would explode as soon as a martial artist stepped into the level. Jian Sanxing obviously knew this. His pause was not only because he was hesitating, but also because he was quickly adjusting his state of mind and preparing to break through the level. In fact, not long after Yi Fei stepped into the 101st level, Jian Sanxing's dazed expression became determined. He also strode into the level. However, Jian Sanxing was still a step too late. Just before he entered, Yi Fei had already used the Taiji sword cauldron to destroy all the phantoms of the Lord of Heaven on the level. He had also broken through 5 levels in a single breath and was completely ahead of him. However, when he reached the 106th level, Yi Fei's expression became serious. This was because the phantoms on this level were already at the mid-stage of the Lord of Heaven. When the 106 phantoms unleashed their supernatural powers at the same time and charged towards him, even Yi Fei's heart skipped a beat. However, a boundless fighting spirit soon emerged from his body. The sword shall press forward with indomitable will. I shall die in 100 battles with no regrets. Boom! The fierce sword light of death turned into a sea of blood that swept across the area. Above the sea of blood, Yi Fei killed one with each step. He continuously beheaded these phantoms. Just like that, he stepped into the sea of blood and walked into the 107th level. This is impossible. He's cheating. How can a commoner like him reach that level? When the light that represented Yi Fei shone on the sword pagoda, maybe completely lost her composure. Ma Feng also lost her composure. In her heart, Jian Sanxing was the strongest. How could he possibly lose? And to a commoner with no reputation at all? Maybe bullsh *t. Yi Fei broke through so quickly because of his ability. If you dare to spout nonsense, I'll fight you right now. Niu Hao was ecstatic. He had never expected that Yi Fei could rise so quickly after falling behind and surpass Jian Sanxing. The Sword Palace had high hopes for. It was even possible that Yi Fei would be the fourth person to clear the Sword Pagoda. If this news were to spread, it would greatly boost the morale of the entire Inner Sword Palace. It would also be a ruthless slap to the Outer Sword Palace's face. Niu Hao's heart was filled with excitement. He grinned and declared, "This brat is indeed a freak. If he can take first place, not only will I help him, but I will also become a disciple of the human ancestor and betroth my daughter to him." "What? You want Yi Fei to marry Senior Niu's daughter?" Bai Yanran said, her face pale. Mad Dog was also shocked. After entering the last level of the Sword Pagoda, Yi Fei felt his hair stand on end. Strange. I have a bad feeling about this. Or is it that the pressure from these half-step Daolords is too strong? Yi Fei didn't dare to think too much about it. He just stared at the illusory figures on the 108 floors with a solemn look on his face. On the last level of the Sword Pagoda, what appeared were not late-stage Lord of Heaven, but full-stage Lord of Heaven half-step Dao Lords. And there were 108 of them at once. Such a force was enough to kill a late-stage Dao Lord. Although Yi Fei was strong, he couldn't help but feel anxious. He wasn't very confident that he could pass this level. However, when he thought about Jian Sanxing, who could catch up at any time, Yi Fei gritted his teeth and strode toward the figures. Boom! There were no words, no breaths. The moment they sensed that someone had intruded, the half-step Dao Lord figures charged over silently and tacitly. The whistling divine ability was like a raging river, instantly filling the entire space. But soon, a fierce light of desolation appeared in the raging waves of divine ability. It was as if all things had withered and the world had withered. It forcefully pierced a huge hole in the raging waves formed by the divine ability. And in the hole, Yi Fei stood with sword in hand. He crushed the figure closest to him with a sword strike. "It's just a half-step Dao Lord puppet. My sword will take its life. Kill." After charging out of the raging waves of divine ability, Yi Fei directly charged toward another half-step Dao Lord figure. At the same time, on the 107th level of the Sword Pagoda, Jian Sanxing was panting as he charged out with fiery eyes. "I, Jian Sanxing, have finally reached this step. The champion of the Sword Pagoda will belong to me. As for that commoner surnamed Yi, he's only worthy of kneeling at my feet." Jian Sanxing's conviction soared to the heavens as he resolutely stepped onto the final floor. However, Yi Fei didn't know this because the two of them had been taking the test in different spaces from beginning to end. However, after a short period of confusion, Jian Sanxing's combat strength was also very terrifying. Chapter 2389. Forget it, but sometimes, a single step could make the difference between heaven and earth. Although Jian Sanxing had relied on Ma Bi's guidance and cheated to pass 100 tests in a row, saving a large amount of Xian Qi for the last 8 tests, he still couldn't pass 100 tests. But at the same time, he fell into a momentary daze after losing the advantage of cheating. It was this daze that caused Jian Sanxing to lose the initiative, which also allowed Yi Fei to seize the opportunity to overtake him and be the first to step into the highest level of the Sword Pagoda. Boom! Within the Sword Pagoda, sword ki filled the air, capable of severing the heavens and shattering the earth. Layers of the blood sea continued to churn within. Yi Fei wielded the great sword in his hands, unleashing terrifying deathly sword light. This was a sword of slaughter, but it was also a sword of death. Wherever the sword light passed, the illusory figures of half-step downlords would collapse like bubbles. After all, the attack of the Sword of Killing was at the level of a mid-stage downlord. To be honest, if it weren't for the fact that there were too many half-step downlords here and their divine abilities were too dense, Yi Fei's sword would be like chopping vegetables in a one-on-one fight. Moreover, thanks to Jian Sansheng's cheating in the first 100 stages, Yi Fei didn't use too much mystic qi on his way up. This undoubtedly became his biggest advantage. 10,000 swords formation. 9-9 return to 1 10,000 swords salute. Suddenly, a mysterious voice rang out from within the sword pagodas. Realizing how powerful Yi Fei's attacks were, the half-step downlords suddenly stopped attacking separately. Instead, all of their illusory figures overlapped together, forming a myriad of sword light that slashed apart the void and shattered everything. Fight! Yi Fei didn't retreat. The blood-red flames on his body burned fiercely. At the same time, he used the golden body of despair to the limit. At this moment, he seemed to have turned into a purple-gold war demon that walked through the primeval starry sky and shattered billions of stars. In the end, Yi Fei allowed the endless sword light to bombard him, destroying his body and destroying his consciousness. Suddenly, a sense of desolation appeared in the boundless storm of swords, forming a grayish-white taiji sword diagram. It slashed forward, repelling the light of the 10,000 swords to the sides. This was the effect of the Sword of Solitude. It did not have the offensive power of the Sword of Slaughter, but it had the unique ability to nullify the opponent's divine ability. At this moment, Yi Fei was forcefully withstanding the terrifying 10,000 sword vortex around him. He used the withering sword and spread his azure dragon wings. In an instant, he charged into the formation formed by the 100 phantoms. His dark steel heavy sword smashed out like a meteor, shattering one of the phantoms into pieces. Suddenly, 2 more taiji sword cauldrons appeared. Sword light howled through the air, and the terrifying light of the sword cauldrons exploded directly against the core of the 10,000 swords formation. Countless illusory half-step downlords appeared, and the entire 10,000 swords formation was shattered. There was no more sword light in the world. Only Yi Fei's body, which was burning with purple-gold blood flames, was rapidly weaving through the phantoms. He swung his sword and strode toward the top of the sword pagoda, where the door of light was located. At this moment, a shocking explosion came from another space. Faced with the siege of 100 half-step downlords, Jian Sansheng did not choose to take them head-on. He had a better idea, which was to use the Divine Lord's sword light that maybe had given him to directly destroy all the phantoms that were pouncing on him. My hesitation at the 100th stage was right. Even though Master told me to use the Divine Lord's sword light immediately after entering the next 8 stages, I am still a prince. But I, Jian Sansheng, am the crown prince of the sword country. How can I obey every order? With my ability, I can pass the first 7 levels and use the Divine Lord's sword light in the last level. This is the best choice. When Jian Sansheng saw that the Divine Lord's sword light had swept away all the phantoms around him, leaving only the empty portal of light behind, a proud and aloof expression appeared on his face again. From now on, there was nothing left. He would be the 4th person to pass the sword pagoda. No matter what method I use, the champion of the sword Dao will belong to me. How laughable that lowly commoner Yi Fei wants to compete with me. How can a commoner like him compete with me? Jian Sansheng stepped into the portal of light with an arrogant expression. At the same time, in another space, Yi Fei put away his dark steel heavy sword and walked into the portal of light. Boom! A powerful teleportation sword light took him out of the sword pagoda and appeared in front of the crowd. Another powerful sword light shook the sword pagoda. Jian Sansheng also walked out at this time. How is this possible? Yi Fei and Jian Sansheng passed the 108 stages at the same time? Who will be the champion of the sword Dao this time? Outside the sword pagoda, all the warriors were shocked. Niu Hao and Maybe also widened their eyes in shock. It was the first time that two people had passed the sword pagoda at the same time. Suddenly, Niu Hao was the first to react. He shouted in ecstasy, "Haha, looks like my son-in-law won. Look, Jian Sanqing is one body position behind Yi Fei. Yi Fei is the first to pass the sword pagoda. This is impossible. I, the crown prince of the Sword Kingdom, lost to a commoner." Jian Sanqing's face was pale. He walked out of the sword pagoda to welcome the cheers of the crowd and create his own glory. But now, the cheers and glory did not belong to him. Yi Fei was half a body position ahead of him, just half a step away. But this half step was like a chasm that could not be crossed. That's not right. Jian Sanqing and Yi Fei walked out of the sword pagoda at the same time. This means that they tied and won the title of champion at the same time. Today is a blessing for my sword palace. Two champions appeared at the same time. My sword palace will prosper and sword Dao will prosper. Maybe smiled. He suddenly raised his hand and hit the wall at the top of the sword pagoda. There were originally 4 names carved on the wall. Now 2 more names appeared. They were Jian Sanqing and Yi Fei. Moreover, Jian Sanqing's name was above Yi Fei's. Only then did Jian Sanqing's pale face regain some color. No matter what, I've already cleared the sword pagoda and obtained the sword pagoda. It's just that I'm not willing to have my name appear in the same place as yours. No, Jian Sanqing, you're wrong. It's my shame to have my name appear in the same place as yours. What kind of *T champion is this? I don't want it. Looking at the name carved on the wall, Yi Fei suddenly slashed with his sword. In an instant, his name was completely erased. I don't care for a champion who cheated, Yi Fei said sarcastically in a voice that only the two of them could hear. Then, he carried his sword and walked down the sky step by step. For a moment, all the warriors present were silent. Many of them widened their eyes. The champion of the sword principle was something that many people would scramble for no matter what. However, Yi Fei had abandoned it as if it was nothing? Bai Yanran and Mad Dog were puzzled. Niu Hao's eyes were already wide open. Maybe was stunned. Jian Sanqing's face suddenly turned ashen. He looked at his name on the sword pagoda. It was so glaring, and there was a trace of inexplicable shame. You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.